Chapter 454. In the past, only the female ducks would incubate the eggs, and this fat male duck would turn a blind eye when the tribesmen took the eggs from their nests. After the second-generation ducks were born, the fat duck lost interest in them. It would patrol the forest every day, but would not stop for the ducklings. But now this fat duck was incubating eggs. But where did these eggs come from? The ducklings had grown so much. Where did these eggs come from? Thinking about the eggs Baigua picked up, could they have been laid by the new ducks? The fat duck stared at Xiao Xian, as if wary of him. With every step Xiao Xian took, it became even more nervous. It even opened its mouth, revealing its sharp teeth. Other wild ducks did not have such sharp teeth, and their feet were not like this duck's either. Other than looking like a duck, there were many strange things about this fat duck. Perhaps all of its previous actions were not as they had imagined? Xiao Xian did not walk in again. He retreated from the duck shed and asked the person who usually took care of the duck shed. That duck. Its behavior was very strange. After you left, it brought back a few eggs from outside. Then, new ducks came to the forest in front of the tribe. After a while, the patrolman noticed that the ducks were laying eggs. At first, it was the same as before, but one day, a patrolman approached the duck's nest in the bushes and was attacked by the green duck. If he did not dodge in time, his hand would have been pecked, said the person who took care of the duck shed. Did it attack the tribesmen? Asked Xiao Xian. If that was the case, they had to keep a close eye on this fat duck. They could not let it go on like this. Not really. After the patrolman left the nest, the duck stopped attacking. However, the patrolman said that he hid behind the bushes and watched secretly. He saw the duck grab an egg from the nest and fly away. After that, even when the patrolman approached the duck's nest in the bushes, it did not react, said the person who took care of the duck shed. This fat duck is hiding eggs. Xiao Xian was surprised. They didn't know when the fat duck had started hiding. It couldn't have been a temporary move. Perhaps it had started a long time ago, and no one had noticed. But why did it bring the eggs back to the duck shed after hiding them? Did he specially bring it back to incubate? Not only did it hide the eggs, it even snatched them. When it grabs the eggs from the duck nest, if it's seen by the mother duck, it will fight with the mother duck. It was clear who would win if they fought. Those wild ducks were no match for this fat duck. How heartless. Later, the patrolling people went to save the mother duck that was almost bitten to death, and the green duck took the egg away. Only one? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, just one. Thinking of something, the person who took care of the duck shed said, that green duck actually often goes to the duck nest, but after seeing it once, it won't go again. It's like it's picking. Yes, it would choose. Whether it was in the trees or in the grass, if there were duck eggs, the fat duck would go and take a look. Most of the time, it would leave after taking a look and would not go back. But sometimes it would grab an egg from the nest and leave with it. It would not look back at the nest again. Other than the eggs, it doesn't care about anything else? Xiao Xian asked. Sometimes, if it sees other wild animals in the forest, it will chase them away. But other than the eggs it takes away, everything else seems to be secondary, said the person who took care of the duck shed. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Xian asked, when was the first time you saw it take the eggs away from the duck nest? Elder, not long after you left, the patrolman noticed. Then one day, I saw it going back and forth from one place in the forest to the duck shed to carry eggs. So it had hidden some eggs a long time ago, and then brought them back to the duck shed? Come to think of it, if it had started stealing eggs so early, then did anything hatch? The person who took care of the duck shed shook his head. It didn't allow me to go near. I watched it every day, but I didn't see anything hatch. There was no other movement at all. When the fat duck left, he even sneaked into the duck shed to take a look at the eggs, but he didn't see anything different. Eggs laid by different ducks had different colors and patterns, but when comparing eggs from the same nest, there really wasn't much of a difference. I only went in to take a look once. The next day, I was threatened by the fat duck. The person who took care of the duck shed still felt a lingering fear when he thought of the fat duck's murderous look. Worried that Xiao Xian would kill the fat duck, the person who took care of the duck shed didn't forget to put in a good word for it. Actually, as long as you don't go in and touch the eggs, that fat duck is quite easy to get along with. Okay, I'll leave it to you guys to take care of the duck shed, Xiao Xian said to the person who took care of the duck shed. It's no trouble at all. When there are more ducks, we'll be able to lay more eggs. Those eggs are more useful than the ducks, someone said. Duck eggs had many effects, especially in detoxification. They were very beneficial to the tribesmen, but not other ducks. The patrolling men once brought back a female duck that had been killed by a wild beast. After eating it, they found that it didn't have much of an effect. It was similar to the normal birds they ate in the forest, so the tribesmen were very attentive when taking care of the slowly growing ducklings. Walking out of the duck shed, Xiao Xian thought about the fat duck's reason for doing this. He wondered what was so different about the eggs it took away. After all, it wasn't a human. Animals in the natural world had all kinds of strange behaviors. He could only wait and see if those eggs would hatch. Xiao Xian walked up the mountain. He hadn't lived there for a while, so a layer of dust had gathered in his house. However, the backyard was often cleaned. The 1,000-grain gold plants were slowly wilting, but Chi-Chi and the others didn't touch them for safety reasons. They planned to check again next year. Putting down his things, Xiao Xian went to look for the chief and shamaness. Guang Yi was talking to the chief and shamaness about the royal city. There were other people in the house as well, people who would usually show up for important meetings. When Xiao Xian arrived, Guang Yi was talking about how Xiao Xian sent Luzong flying with one palm. Everyone's faces twitched, imagining the scene in their minds. Seeing Xiao Xian enter, the chief, Zheng Luo, had a smile in his eyes and invited him to sit. Ever since Xiao Xian came to the tribe, there was an extra seat next to the chief. It was reserved for Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian and the shamaness sat on both sides of the chief. The rest had to sit at the back. Everyone was happy with the grains Xiao Xian brought back, as well as Heng's weapons. Of course, the most exciting thing was how Xiao Xian sent the Linlu chief flying with one palm. The Yanjiao people didn't care what others thought. They approved of Xiao Xian's actions. To them, it was very exciting. I should thank my ancestors. Xiao Xian took out the bone ornaments he was wearing. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Thank you for your blessings. The shamaness wanted to kneel and kowtow. The others were the same. To them, there was nothing better than being blessed by their ancestors. Right, what about the salt mine? How's it going? Asked Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian's words dampened the happy atmosphere in the room. Zheng Luo wiped the smile off his face, his expression dark. The Fox and Shen tribes are serious this time. The 5 tribes that divided the mine would each send people to guard the mine. They would change every once in a while. However, a few days before the trade, the people stationed at the mine returned. They were all injured, some with arrows in their bodies. Their lives were in danger, and the arrows were laced with poison. They had been lying in bed ever since they came back and could only walk for 2 days. The people stationed there were forced to leave. Other than us, the Taiha people were forced to come back too. Thank goodness they brought the herbs or our people would have died from the poison, said Duo Kong angrily. In the beginning, it was just a chase. They didn't attack too harshly. That's why so many people came back alive. However, the Mountain Wind tribesmen were not satisfied. When they went over again, the Fox and Shin tribes were much more ruthless. Many of the Mountain Wind tribesmen died. Zheng Luo said to Xiao Xian, "Yesterday, the Mountain Wind tribesmen sent a letter. They asked us to meet up with the Taiha people for a discussion. They want revenge, but they can't win against them alone. We want to take back the salt mine too. We also want to know why the Fox and Shin tribes are doing this. That's why we agreed to meet up with them. The Fox and Shin tribes have different attitudes. Why is that?" Xiao Xian pondered. If it was just to take back the salt mine, they wouldn't have held back the first time. Could it be that there's something else in the mine? Zheng Luo nodded. I thought of that too, but I don't know what's in the mine that's worth turning against the other 3 tribes. If that's the case, it must be something very important for them to turn against the other 3 tribes. There must be a lot of it too. Zheng Luo's eyes burned with passion. If there was something good, how could the Yanjiao people miss it? If they couldn't negotiate peacefully, then they'd just have to take it. Xiao Xian understood too. Perhaps the Fox and Shin tribes only found out about the stuff the first time. That's why they worked together to chase the other 3 tribes away. However, they didn't want to offend the other tribes too much, so they held back. That was the only way to turn back. But later on, perhaps they found out about the stuff in the mine, and the quantity exceeded their expectations. Coincidentally, the Mountain Wind tribesmen went over too. That's why they chose to kill them. They wanted to take the stuff for themselves, and were willing to go to war with the other 3 tribes. Fox and Sun went to look for the other tribes and promised to give them a large amount of salt if they were willing to help. That's why the Mountain Wind tribesmen want us to work with the Taiha tribe. That's how they can continue fighting. I'll go with you all tomorrow, Xiao Xian said. Xiao Xian and Guang Yi's return made everyone feel more at ease. Having two more powerful fighters was a boost to morale. However, before that, Xiao Xian planned to ask the people guarding the mine for details. The leader of the guards had been shot several times in order to protect the rest of the team as they left. He had almost died and had been lying in bed since he came back. He must be very weak now. For a strong Yanjiao person to lie in bed for so long, this injury must have turned a strong man into a bag of bones. Xiao Xian was prepared to see a frail and weak man. However, when he followed Zheng Luo, the man he saw was completely different. His face was rosy and he had gained weight. Seeing Xiao Xian's shocked expression, the man pursed his lips and explained, "I ate too many eggs." Chapter 455. This man was called Wacha. On the way here, Zheng Luo had already introduced him to Xiao Xian. Because Wacha was often stationed outside the salt mines, he did not spend much time in the tribe. However, he would come back during the ceremony and stand closer to the front. Xiao Xian still remembered him. Because of this, Xiao Xian was shocked. In his memory, Wacha's skin was darker. When the temperature was high, his bare arms and other parts of his skin looked like they were greased by the sun. There were small poisonous insects in the salt mines. After being bitten, there would be scars. If the scars healed and the toxins were not completely expelled, there would be a dent. Wacha, who was often stationed in the salt mines, naturally had plenty of experience being bitten by poisonous insects. The most obvious sign was his bumpy face. It looked rough, much more obvious than orange peel. However, the tribesmen did not think much of it. They even thought it looked more intimidating and intimidating. In fact, it was true. With this face, when Wacha put on a straight face, he looked like a giant boulder that could fall at any moment. It was very intimidating. But now, not only were the intimidating dents gone, his tan skin was much redder. At first glance, Xiao Xian did not know who it was. After some inspection, he confirmed it was Wacha. Seeing Xiao Xian's scrutinizing gaze, Wacha was embarrassed. Every time someone came to visit him, they would be shocked. Wacha looked at himself in the basin and even borrowed the shamanist's bronze mirror to look at himself. It was unbearable to look at. Wacha felt like he could not face the tribesmen anymore. Without the dents on his face, he did not look like the leader of the salt mines. He was anxious. Seeing Wacha's sad face, Zheng Luo said angrily, "This is a good thing. It means that the toxins in your body are all gone." The poison left behind by the poisonous insects in the salt mines was very strong. Even the herbs made by the Taiha tribe were not completely effective. Plus, the herbs made by the Taiha tribe were limited. If anyone needed them, they had to trade for them. Wacha couldn't bear to part with them, so he wouldn't trade for herbs. But who would have thought that she would become like this after eating a few eggs when she was recuperating? As they were talking, a woman walked in with a big jar filled with water. She was Wacha's wife, Susha. Both of them were totemic warriors and were part of the mining team. When she saw Zheng Luo and Xiao Xian, Susha quickly put aside the large water tank filled with water. She pushed her long braids decorated with animal fangs behind her back and smiled, revealing her white teeth. "Chief and Elder are here." Like Wacha, Susha's face was a lot redder. She didn't look like someone who often guarded the mines. Susha took out another egg and said to Wacha, "I just got this from the shaman. We'll share it later." Wacha's family of 4 was him, his wife, their young son, and his mother. Wacha's father had died in a hunt when he was young. There were only the 4 of them now. Usually, when Wacha and his wife were away guarding the mines, the old lady would take care of the child. When she heard about the accident at the mines, the old lady panicked. When Wacha came back with serious injuries and Susha's condition worsened, she traded some salt from the shaman for 2 duck eggs. The old lady heard that the eggs had detoxification properties and were good for recovery, so she immediately traded for them. Needless to say, the effect was quite obvious. Susha's injuries weren't serious, and she recovered in a few days. Wacha's injuries were too serious. There were too many toxins in his body and many fractures. He couldn't get out of bed, so he was bedridden. But he could walk now. The toxins in his body were mostly gone too. He would recover faster in the future. Wacha looked at the eggs helplessly. "I'm healed. I don't need to eat it. You 3 can share it. This is the last one. You might not even get to eat it in the future. The shaman doesn't have many eggs left, and you're mostly recovered. You don't need to eat anymore." Susha took the egg and was about to cook it. The patrolling team would give all the duck eggs they found to the shaman. Other people couldn't easily get eggs from the shaman. Wacha and his wife were injured at work, and the tribe had to take responsibility. That was why the first 2 eggs were given to them by the shaman. Later on, they continued to trade for them with salt. Since the Wacha family was stationed at the mines, they got a lot of salt. Xiao Xian saw a few pots with pointed bottoms in the house. They were open and had a lace border. There was also a pot with a round bottom. These were the tools they used to boil salt. There was also a smaller pot with a pointed bottom. It wasn't the main tool for boiling salt, but for measuring. When tribes traded with each other, they used these pots. A small pot of salt was the unit of measurement. However, sometimes the tribes were too far away from each other, and trading was troublesome. When making pottery, they would make more small pottery cups like this. The boiled salt would be kept in the cups, and then the cups and salt would be exchanged with other tribes who came to trade. To some extent, the salt could already be used as currency here. Because of this, the tribes kept a close watch on the salt mines. In the past, they had also used force to force their way in and divide the salt mines. After Susha left, Wacha asked, "Chief, what do you want to know?" Xiao Xian wants to ask about the mines. Zheng Luo brought 2 wooden poles over and sat down with Xiao Xian. At the mines, did Fox and Forest hold back when they attacked? Xiao Xian asked. That's right. Even though Wacha was injured and almost died, he knew whether they held back or not. If they really wanted to kill them all, they wouldn't have had so many survivors. A few days before the change, were there any unusual movements from the Fox and Forest people? Asked Xiao Xian. Wacha shook his head regretfully. I didn't notice. It wasn't that Wacha was careless. They were just too cautious. There were 5 tribes guarding the salt mines. None of them would easily trust others. The Flaming Horns and Taiha tribe had a cooperative relationship. Sometimes they would communicate more, but the other 3 tribes didn't talk much. Plus, each tribe was stationed in a different area. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't step into another tribe's territory. Zheng Luo had asked the people who returned, but didn't get any useful information. So it must be something very important. The person who discovered it was worried that more people would notice, so he tried his best to hide it. Xiao Xian listened to Wacha's detailed account of what happened, then got up to leave. Chief Elder, we must get the mines back as soon as possible. We can't wait until winter. Wacha had dealt with the Fox tribe too many times. He knew how cunning they were. The longer they dragged it out, the worse it would be. They might even lose the mines forever. Don't worry, rest well. Tomorrow, I'll bring people out with Taiha. Mountain Wind has already arranged a place. We'll discuss it in detail. If we want to fight for the mines, we'll do it even if it snows, said Zheng Luo. After leaving Wacha's place, Zheng Luo asked Xiao Xian, what do you think? It's the same as before. The Fox and Forest tribes have different attitudes. When they attacked the second time, they recruited many people from other tribes to help. They must have planned this. The mines must be heavily guarded now, said Xiao Xian. That's why Mountain Wind's people are at a disadvantage. They were suspicious at first, but when they went to investigate, they found out that the other side's attitude had changed. Of the 50 people who went out to investigate, only 10 returned. Mountain Wind is very angry this time. In the past, they rarely came out in winter, but now because of the salt mine, they've announced that they will fight even if it snows heavily. Zheng Luo sighed, but his eyes were firm. No matter what, we must get the salt mine back. Xiao Xian, go back and rest. We'll leave tomorrow. All right. After returning, Xiao Xian had a good rest. After returning to the tribe, his whole body relaxed and he slept well. When he woke up, all his tiredness was gone. In the morning, Xiao Xian wrapped Gongjia Heng's repaired sword in leather and brought along some daily necessities. Zheng Luo was already waiting for them. Other than Xiao Xian, Duo Kong and more than 40 warriors were with him. However, Guang Yi was left behind to guard the tribe. He led the patrols to strengthen the defenses and prevent ambushes. After leaving the tribe's perimeter, they waited for a while and saw about 50 people from Taiha. They were led by the Taiha tribe's chief. The chiefs of all 3 tribes were present for this tripartite meeting. What's the Mountain Wind tribe like? Xiao Xian was not familiar with the Mountain Wind tribe. Other than the salt mines, the Yanjiao tribe and Mountain Wind did not interact much. Mountain Wind? They're just a bunch of self-righteous people, Duo Kong replied succinctly. Chapter 456. Xiao Xian understood Duo Kang's words when he saw the Mountain Wind people. The Mountain Wind tribe agreed to meet in a valley. There weren't many trees around, and even if there were, they weren't thick old trees. The Flaming Horns and Taiha tribesmen each found a place to rest first. Duo Kong ordered his men to move large rocks over. These rocks could be used as stools or weapons. The Taiha tribesmen couldn't do this. So what if you're strong? The Taiha people muttered to themselves. The Mountain Wind people didn't let the Yanjiao and Taiha people wait. Xiao Xian brought a large rock over and sat down for a while. Suddenly, he heard a sharp and short cry. It sounded like a bird. When they heard this cry, the Flaming Horns and Taiha people all looked up. "They're here," Zheng Luo said. Xiao Xian didn't understand why everyone was looking up at the sky until he saw a few figures appear on top of the steep cliff behind them. Then, more and more figures appeared and jumped down one by one. Boom! The sound was like the sound of an umbrella opening. The people who jumped down from the high mountain walls spread their wings. No, they weren't real wings. They didn't grow from their bodies. Instead, it was something that looked a lot like wings. Xiao Xian watched as the people in the air adjusted their wings and changed direction. They rushed down towards the ground. When they got close, they shook violently twice before landing safely. Xiao Xian thought the Mountain Wind tribe's totem would be a bird with large wings. But when he saw them, he saw that the totem decorations on their bodies were all birds without wings. What a strange tribe. Looking at their wings up close, as an experienced hunter, Xiao Xian could see that the Mountain Wind people's wings were made of animal skin. The craftsmanship was very delicate, like a special piece of clothing. He didn't know how these clothes were made. The animal skin was specially treated, so it looked like a flexible membrane. It wasn't covered with feathers, but some of the Mountain Wind people used feathers as decorations. After landing, the Mountain Wind people kept their wings. They looked like they were wearing a strange cloak. In the past, the Feather tribesmen only raised birds, but the Mountain Wind tribesmen thought of themselves as birds. To be more precise, they thought their ancestors were birdmen who just didn't have wings. Rumor had it that the bird on their totem had always been looking for wings, so the Mountain Wind tribesmen did everything they could to give themselves a pair. Duo Kong said the Mountain Wind people had been wearing clothes like this since a long time ago. To be able to make clothes like this that were so close to the body and flexible without any air resistance, they were geniuses. Probably because Xiao Xian's gaze was too strong, the other party's chief frowned when he saw Xiao Xian. "Where's Wacha?" Mountain Wind and Yanjiao mostly talked about the people guarding the mines. Wacha, the leader of the guards, couldn't come because he was sick. He's recovering in the tribe. Zheng Luo didn't say how Wacha was doing. The Taiha and Mountain Wind people both knew that Wacha, the leader of the guards in Yanjiao, was heavily injured and almost died. What they didn't know was that not only did Wacha survive, he was almost fully recovered. Among the people the three parties brought, there were familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces. But now wasn't the time to pay attention to that. That was why the Mountain Wind chief only glanced at Xiao Xian before looking away. He thought Xiao Xian was just Zheng Luo's nephew. "I asked you out today to talk. We've already decided to take the salt mines. What's your decision? Are you willing to work with us?" asked the Mountain Wind chief. Zheng Luo and the Taiha chief exchanged glances. He sat on a rock and said slowly, "Of course we'll take back the salt mines. You took Yanjiao's things and chased our people away. We'll take revenge." Then he changed the topic. "But you Mountain Wind didn't tell us the truth." This was what Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo had discussed. If Mountain Wind dared to test the salt mines, they definitely weren't useless. But after losing so many people, it was impossible that they didn't get any useful information. It was just that Mountain Wind didn't tell Yanjiao and Taiha. The Mountain Wind chief's expression changed slightly, but he didn't refute or answer. He remained silent, as if agreeing. He looked towards Taiha. "We won't give up on the mines. You want to work with us? Fine. But like Zheng Luo, we want to know the truth. We don't want to be kept in the dark. If we don't know the truth, we won't work with you," said the Taiha chief. They were on the same page as the Flaming Horns. If it weren't for the Mountain Wind tribe, the two tribes would have joined forces to fight for the salt mines. The Mountain Wind tribe should be the most anxious right now because they didn't interact much with other tribes. They couldn't find a tribe they could ally with. The Mountain Wind chief didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for the people behind him to guard the area. Zheng Luo and the Taiha chief also gestured for the people they brought to guard the area. The people brought by the three chiefs all went to guard the area to prevent other tribes from eavesdropping or ambushing them. Other than the chief, only 1 or 2 people from each tribe stayed behind. Those who could stay with the chief were either the closest to the chief or had a high status in the tribe. Now, even Duo Kong brought people to guard the area. Xiao Xian sat beside Zheng Luo and didn't leave. The Taihe tribe knew about Xiao Xian's status in Yanjiao, but the Mountain Wind people didn't. The Mountain Wind chief looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. He guessed that this was probably Zheng Luo's son. Otherwise, he wouldn't trust him so much. However, the Mountain Wind chief only studied Xiao Xian a few more times before calming himself down and thinking about what to say. There were only a few core members left. He didn't plan to hide his trip from Yanjiao and Taihe. After all, the Mountain Wind tribe's combat power was limited. They would only be at a disadvantage if they tried to take the salt mines by force. As you know, after the fox and forest men chased our men away from the salt mines, we, Mountain Wind, sent our men there again. I told you there were 50 people, but other than these 50 people, there were another 10 people. They infiltrated the salt mines and found that there was a place where the fox and forest people were guarding tightly. Even when they heard an attack, none of them left. They stood there motionless, as if the things there were the most important. After paying a price, one of our people finally managed to get in. Too bad he didn't get to see what was inside. But the Mountain Wind chief's eyes burned with passion. But the person who got in was also the one with the sharpest senses in our tribe. He could sense things that others couldn't. When he came back heavily injured, he only said one word: fire crystals. Zheng Luo's heart skipped a beat, his breathing quickening. He wasn't the only one. The Taihe people reacted the same way. Xiao Xian was also surprised. There were also fire crystals here, also called fire crystals. The difference was that on the other side of the sea, after finding fire crystals, they had to bring them back to the tribe and use the power of the fire seed to digest and absorb it. However, this was not the case here. Probably because the fire seed had already integrated into their bodies, they did not need to bring the fire crystals back to the tribe after finding them. After all, the fire seed had already disappeared. All they needed to do was use their fire seed's power. Although it took longer to digest them, it did work. When Xiao Xian first came here, he had read about fire crystals in his ancestors' notes, but it was very rare. On the other hand, the tribe hadn't seen any fire crystals in many years. Even if they did, it was from the tribe's collection, or they found very few. Now that the Mountain Wind people mentioned fire crystals and the Fox and Shin tribe's extreme reactions, they could deduce that there were fire crystals in the mines, and in large quantities. No wonder the Fox and Shin tribes were so crazy. Perhaps the Fox and Shin tribes had found fire crystals in the beginning and met up to discuss a collaboration. But they only found a small amount, so they wanted to chase the other 3 tribes away before investigating. That was why they left some leeway when they chased them away. If they didn't find a large amount in the end, they would dig up the fire crystals and return the salt mines to the other 3 tribes. It was not wise to make an enemy out of 3 tribes who were as strong as them over a few fire crystals. But later on, they found a large amount of fire crystals, enough to shake their plans. That was why they decided to be ruthless when the Mountain Wind people went to investigate. Not everyone could easily detect the fire crystal. Some animals with special abilities might be able to detect it. However, the salt mine area was special, and it blocked the detection of the fire crystal. So until now, no one and no animals had discovered the fire crystal until they dug the mine. Now that they knew the truth, Zheng Luo and the Taihe chief both thought of one thing: steal. If it really was fire crystals, they had to steal them. Everyone wanted to take the fire crystals for themselves. But after calming down and assessing the situation, they had to admit that they had to work together. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be able to get a piece of salt, let alone fire crystals. The Fox and Shin tribes had already formed an alliance and even used salt to attract reinforcements. It seemed like their alliance was the best. When the Mountain Wind chief mentioned the fire crystals, he paid attention to the Yanjiao and Taihe tribesmen's reactions. Their shock and excitement were obvious. No one could calm down after hearing this, except the Mountain Wind chief studied Xiao Xian for the 3rd time. After the shock, the others looked like they wanted to rush over and steal the crystals. But what about that kid? Other than being surprised at first, he seemed to be distracted. No matter what he was thinking, he did not look as excited as the others. Although he did look a little excited, he was much calmer than the others. The mountain wind chief couldn't help but think, did this kid not know the importance of fire crystals, or was he retarded? Zheng Luo and the Taihe chief exchanged glances. After working together for so long, they understood each other and could guess each other's decision. If that's the case, Yanjiao agrees to work together, said Zheng Luo. Taihe agrees too, said the Taihe tribesman. Since they had decided to work together, there were many details to discuss, including how to split the crystals. Once they were decided, they had to swear on their totems. Tribesmen valued this oath and would not break it easily, even if it involved fire crystals. The three chiefs discussed for half a day and a night, then left the next day. Xiao Xian watched as the mountain wind tribesmen leaped from the steep cliff, agilely using the force of their wings to leap up. In a few blinks of an eye, they were on top of the cliff and out of sight. Let's go back and prepare. Zheng Luo told them to hurry back to the tribe. Snow was coming soon, but this winter would not be peaceful in the forest. Chapter 457. After Zheng Luo brought his men back to the tribe, he gathered all the important people in the tribe for a meeting. He listened to everyone's suggestions and started mobilizing them. Whatever they could do, such as arrows, weapons, herbs, food, straw ropes, animal skin bags, clothes, and so on, they had to be specially prepared. The equipment that was originally reserved for winter was no longer suitable for fighting in the forest. Right, let's distribute the weapons we brought back, said Xiao Xian. The others were deep in thought, thinking about how to distribute the tasks to their subordinates when they returned. When they heard Xiao Xian, they all looked up, their eyes burning. Since Xiao Xian was the one who brought these back, he had more authority to decide. On the way back from the meeting, Xiao Xian had told Zheng Luo about the distribution of the weapons. Same as usual, distribute according to merit, said Xiao Xian. There was no way to refute that. Everyone would be at ease if they were given better quality weapons. If they were given to someone who didn't have much ability, it might be easy for the weapons to be snatched away. Chief Zheng Luo and hunting team leader Duo Kong had already used the weapons Gong Jiaheng left behind last time. The remaining weapons, including the ones Xiao Xian brought back this time, added up to less than 10. There was a limit to the good stuff, so they couldn't distribute it to everyone. Everyone had to rely on their own abilities. Fortunately, the last time Gong Jiaheng came, the warriors of the tribe had been secretly competing with each other. Zheng Luo had seen it all. Hunting, trading, guarding the mines, and so on were all recorded, so he had a list of names in his mind. Now, he had a list of people to distribute the weapons to. After listening to Xiao Xian, Zheng Luo listed out the names in his mind. Everyone present could be witnesses. He was not biased. The people Zheng Luo mentioned were indeed capable and had made contributions. The younger generation included Wu Zhan, Tao Zheng, Zhuai, and the others. The older generation included Zheng Luo's younger brother Zheng Cheng. Although he was a bit rash, it was undeniable that he was strong. Back then, he wanted to compete with Zheng Luo for the position of leader. Unfortunately, he had a bad temper and did not succeed. To be honest, the distribution of the tribe was fair. The shamaness was there to watch the important events. Even if Duo Kong wanted to fight for his son, it was useless. Compared to the others, Duo Li was indeed inferior. Therefore, Duo Kong could only think that he would train Duo Li well in the future. If he didn't work hard, he wouldn't even be able to get a weapon. After assigning the weapons, they said what they needed to say. This was not the first time they had fought. Everyone knew what to do, and hurriedly left Zheng Luo's house to assign their own tasks. Xiao Xian went to look for the leader of the mine guards, Wacha. Now that Wacha could get out of bed, he would walk around the mountain every day. When Xiao Xian went to his house, he saw Susha chopping firewood with an axe. Wacha, he's gone down the mountain. Susha turned the axe handle in her hand and chopped a wooden stake into wooden blocks of almost the same size. He wanted to chop firewood in the morning, but I chased him out to exercise his limbs. He hasn't fully recovered from his injuries, so how can he chop firewood? I suggested that he go down the mountain to watch people feed ducks. That bird is called duck, right? Let him see where he gets his duck eggs from. It'll be great if he can raise more in the future. Not only did he not chop firewood, he was also chased out to watch the ducks. One could only imagine how depressed Wacha was. Xiao Xian smiled and thanked Susha before walking down the mountain to the duck shed. Most people now knew that the tribe was going to rob the salt mines. The atmosphere in the tribe was a little tense and serious. The few families that Xiao Xian passed by were all preparing for the battle. Some of them had to sew animal skin clothes and bags by themselves. Some of them had not awakened their totemic power, and even with their bone needles, they couldn't pierce through the thick, ferocious beast skin. They could only sew ordinary animal skin bags and make straw ropes. Xiao Xian found Wacha at the duck shed. Wacha was talking to the person taking care of the duck shed. When the person saw Xiao Xian, he hurried over and reported the situation in the duck shed. It was more or less the same as before. However, the ducks who were willing to stay in the tribe were less active in the day and often stayed in the shed. The green duck was still the same. Most of the time, it stayed in the shed to hatch its eggs. Those eggs were especially hard to hatch. There was no movement even after so long. Oh, right. The person slapped his forehead. He almost forgot the most important thing. Elder, you said that if you saw ducks laying eggs, you would send them to a separate shed. I really did find more than one. The person in charge of the duck shed told him that Bai Guo's discovery of the eggs was not an accident. Later on, the patrolling team also found eggs elsewhere. Although they only found 3 eggs, it was still a good thing. Those ducks laid eggs, but they didn't hatch. The patrol team picked up the eggs along with the ducks. Look, the 2 ducks with grass juice on their necks were the ones that had laid eggs recently. However, the eggs found by the patrol team didn't match. It's okay. We can just separate them if we see them in the future. If we take good care of them, they might be able to continue laying eggs in the winter. It's just that the eggs they lay might not have the same effect as before. I see. The person was slightly disappointed, but it was better to have eggs than not. Wait for the ducklings to grow up and continue laying eggs. That's fine, right? That's right. Ha! The person rubbed his hands together, full of enthusiasm again. Seeing that Xiao Xian was looking for Wacha, the person left to check on the other sheds. Xiao Xian and Wacha found 2 wooden posts to sit on. Xiao Xian told him why he was here. Salt mine? Wacha remembered that Xiao Xian had never been to a salt mine before. He explained the history of the mine and the few battles they had fought. Xiao Xian did not know much about the salt mines here. When he was in the tribe, there were salt ponds around. In the beginning, the Yanjiao tribe lived in an isolated environment. Of course, no one fought for it. When he came to the old haunt, the tribe also found a salt lake. Although it was a little far, no one fought with the Yanjiao tribe. After all, other than the Yanjiao tribe, no one wanted to live in the fearsome beast forest. Over here, Xiao Xian experienced a battle for the salt mines for the first time. Most of the salt in the tribe had been processed. When Xiao Xian got his hands on it, it was already ground up and stored in small pots. Because of Xiao Xian's special status in the tribe, he did not need to worry about salt. But now, since the cooperation plan between the 3 tribes had been finalized, it was certain that there would be a battle soon. Before that, Xiao Xian wanted to know more about salt. He had been in a hurry, leaving for a long time each time. He did not know much about the situation here. After returning from the royal city, he did not have the time to ask about it. Listening to Wacha, he felt that the battles for the salt mines and ponds were all salty and fishy. The salty part was salt, and the fishy part was blood. Chapter 458. Why did the tribesman value salt so much? When there was no salt, he could actually survive. However, when there was salt, that strong desire was completely stimulated. Whether it was the people here or the tribes on the other side of the sea, they all believed that salt could strengthen their bodies and minds. It was a gift from the heavens. Only with salt could life be filled with passion. Tribesmen fought for territory and prey. Salt was one of the factors that ignited the flames of war. Wacha said that the salt mine the tribe occupied was discovered a few hundred years ago. The first people to discover the salt mine couldn't defend it, and the entire tribe suffered. In the end, the entire tribe moved to a city. They had no choice. They couldn't win against the other tribes, and to prevent themselves from being attacked, they fled. After that, the battle for the salt mines intensified. The Flaming Horn tribe didn't give up on this fat piece of meat. In the end, they managed to squeeze out the others and snatched a spot. However, they couldn't monopolize it with their abilities at the time. At that time, there were only a few people in the tribe, less than 1,000. Other than their own abilities, the Taiha tribe also played a big role in this. The Flaming Horn tribe had always remembered this favor and had been working with the Taiha tribe all these years. After a few hundred years, the battle for the salt mine never stopped. But the 5 tribes never changed. They seemed to be on the same side and didn't allow anyone else to take a step in. It seemed like they had an agreement, and the 5 tribes were working together. But in reality, there was a secret behind this. The 5 tribes that occupied the salt mines could have fewer people, but they absolutely couldn't have more people. That salt mine is a treasure, Watcher exclaimed. This was one of the reasons why he kept insisting on taking back the salt mine. Elder, do you know the Chilu tribe? Watcher asked. Chilu? Xiao Xian thought for a moment and nodded. I've heard of them. I only heard about them when I entered the city to trade. I don't know much about them. The Chilu tribe was a tribe that believed in salt. There were many legends about salt in their tribe. It was said that the earliest salt was discovered by them. It was said that one of the ancestors of the Chilu tribe saw a strange animal. That animal took him to a lake, and then he saw a miracle. The so-called miracle was a salt lake. The totem of the Chilu tribe was that strange-looking animal. It was called the salt beast. Until now, no one had seen that animal. Some people said that it was made up by the Chilu people. But the Chilu people had always believed that the salt beast existed. As for whether it was true or not, no one could say for sure. However, after the rise of the 6 major tribes and the establishment of cities, they became aristocratic slave owners, which led to changes in the other tribes. The Chilu tribe's salt lake had been seized by the other 6 tribes. They didn't have the ability to take back the salt lake that had been taken over by the other 6 tribes. The scattered Chilu tribesmen entered the 6 cities and sometimes helped the nobles make salt for a living. However, a few years ago, they heard that the nobles found a new salt spring and gathered some of the Chilu tribesmen to build a city there. They named it Chilu Salt City. There were quite a lot of people who went to Chilu Salt City. Of course, Wacha didn't mention the Chilu people because he wanted Xiao Xian to understand their history. The Chilu people's salt-making skills are similar to the Gongjia family's forging skills. They are famous among the tribes. Even the slave owners would hire the Chilu people to make salt. The salt they make is very expensive. Most of it is used by the nobles. If others want to buy it, they have to spend a few times more, said Wacha. Xiao Xian understood this. For example, the golden grains produced by Jiju's golden fields were famous everywhere. Everyone from the cities to the mountain tribes had heard of it. However, other than the 5 tribes who own the salt mines, no one knows that the salt from our mines doesn't require any complicated extraction process. The salt we get is much better than theirs. At this point, Wacha's face was filled with pride. His tribe was able to get such a good resource. Of course it was worth being proud of. No wonder the salt mines were rarely mentioned. They were purposely downplaying their existence so that fewer people would know about it. Even more than half of the tribesmen did not know what the salt mines looked like. The tribesmen were only told not to trade their own salt. If they wanted to trade, they had to look for the people in charge of such trades. They would make the arrangements. The tribesmen had always obeyed this order and never made an exception. It wasn't just the Yanjiao tribe. The other 4 tribes, Fox, Forest, Mountain Wind, and Taiha, all did the same. They kept it a secret. High-quality salt could sell for a higher price. They could even step on the famous Chilu people and trade for more things from the Great 6 cities. However, it was also very dangerous. If they sold it, the Great 6 cities would definitely covet it. Based on their style, they would definitely interfere with the salt mines. The Chilu people were a good example. Hence, the 5 tribes would never leak the news. Because of this, when the 5 tribes discovered the quality of the salt mines, they all followed the same rule. They would not let any other tribes interfere, nor would they leak the news. As for trading with other tribes, even in such a high-quality salt mine, there was a difference between different types of salt. We'll collect salt in the cave. The salt at the top of the cave will be put aside after we collect it. That's all good salt for our own tribesmen. In the future, we'll secretly transport it back to the tribe so that no one will notice the difference. The salt on top of the cave you mentioned, is that what we usually eat? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, that's it. When you looked at it, did the salt look a little red? Wacha asked Xiao Xian. Indeed. At that time, Xiao Xian noticed that the color of the salt he was given was different from the ones he had seen before, but the taste was not bad. Everyone was given the same salt, so Xiao Xian didn't think much of it. He didn't expect that there was a secret behind it. The salt extracted from our salt mines, compared to the lake salt of the Chilu people and the salt produced from the new salt spring of the slave masters, has a stronger taste with a strong feeling. Usually when we roast meat, we don't add anything else, just this salt is enough. The taste is very good, and the mood is good. If we let the warriors eat roast meat without salt, they might not have such a big appetite. We've tasted some salt from Amba City before. It doesn't taste as good as the salt from our mines. Sometimes the trading teams would bring back some salt too, but it's of lower quality. It's just a cover. Watcha felt that this was a smart move. It was not eye-catching and could be used as a cover. To the tribesmen, what they ate was not meat but power, and salt played an important role in this. If the salt from the top of the cave is for your own people, then the salt from other places is sold? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, the salt we sell is from other parts of the cave. Although the quality is good, it's not as good as the salt from the top. The salt from other places is even worse. No one uses it, and the salt we make is sold to others. Tribesmen wouldn't scrimp and save for themselves and sell better things. To them, this kind of behavior was extremely stupid, so they would only save the best things for their own people and sell the worst things for others. The Yanjiao people were like that. The other 4 tribes were like that too. This was especially true for the salt caves that they had dug out. Not a single piece of salt that was mined from the ground near the caves would be left for themselves. This secret was shared by all 5 tribes. Therefore, other than the 5 tribes guarding this place, the other tribesmen had no idea how good the quality of the salt in this mine was. Even if they took the salt they bought from the 5 tribes and went to the cities to trade, they wouldn't think too much about it. Even if they did, it wouldn't be too strong. After all, more and more salt springs and ponds had been discovered. Although most of them were occupied by the 6 noble families, there were still some in the hands of the tribesmen. They wouldn't come all the way to the mountains and forests just because of a salt mine. When something happened at the salt mines, the Fox and Shun tribes used salt to get some people to help them. The salt they used was of lower quality, so the core secrets would not be leaked. Oh, Elder, I'm sure you haven't seen the original appearance of the salt mines we just mined. As Watcha spoke, he reached to his waist and took out a beast skin pouch. There was a small jar inside. The jar was made from the bones of a ferocious beast. It was about the size of a fist and was sealed with a wooden stopper. Watcha pulled out the cork and pressed the lid of the jar against his open palm. When the lid was opened, Xiao Xian thought it was a piece of fresh meat when he saw the salt in Watcha's hand. It was red and white. Maybe it was because it had melted a little, but it looked tender, like freshly minced meat that had been washed in water. This is salt. Xiao Xian leaned closer to take a closer look. Upon closer inspection, it did indeed have the texture of a crystal. It must have felt clearer when it was first mined, but with Watcha's help, there were some changes. Watcha looked at the salt rock in his hand, his eyes burning with passion. This is what we harvested from the top of the cave. When we boil it again, the color of the salt will be lighter, just like the one elders got. However, the people guarding the mine usually use it directly and don't boil it. 2 days before the incident at the mines, I put a small piece of salt in the jar. I wanted to put it in when I cooked meat soup with my brothers. Watcha's eyes turned cold when he said this. He seemed to remember what happened that day. Most of the warriors would grind the salt and bring it with them, but some were more used to bringing whole pieces. Like Watcha and the others who were guarding the mines, they brought pieces of salt. Other than using herbs to brew tea, the warriors would also put some salt in their water bottles to drink when they used up a lot of energy. This wasn't because they had any theoretical knowledge. It was because they relied on their instincts and their body's desire. They would do what their body needed. Other than the salt they usually used, they would also marinate the prey they hunted. With the salt, the meat wouldn't rot easily. After drying it, it could be stored for longer. It was said that some tribes that were good at weaving and dyeing cloth would purposely buy salt of lower quality. Their dyeing method involved salt, so the dyed cloth could be directly taken to King City and sold to the slave masters at a high price. To the tribesmen, salt was distributed in all aspects of their lives. The battle for salt had always existed. Even if there were no fire crystals, the Yanjiao tribes would snatch the mines back. Elder, when you go to the salt mine, we'll snatch the salt mine back. Then you'll be able to see more salt. When we sleep in the salt cave, we dream of these pieces of salt. Watcha carefully placed the salt back into the jar and licked his palm. He suddenly thought of something and said, I even dreamed of fire crystals yesterday, but forgot about it when I woke up. I think if we continue digging down, we might see fire crystals. Usually they would dig along the horizontal line and continue digging after they were done. The fox's mining method was different. Perhaps they would start digging before they were done with the first layer. Xiao Xian thought this was possible. When he found the fire crystals in Bat Mountain's sinkhole, other than the ones in the sinkhole, the rest were deep in the mountains. Perhaps the salt in the mines was different and had something to do with the fire crystals. There were so many mines. How many fire crystals could there be inside or below the mountains? Chief, you're planning to move in 3 days, right? Wacha asked. Because of his injuries, Zheng Luo didn't want Wacha to come along. He didn't even call him during the meeting. However, he kept the weapons he gave Wacha. Zheng Luo wanted to give them to him after he recovered. In 3 days, we'll split up with the Taiha people and head there. We'll split into 3 groups, Xiaoxian said. Wacha scratched his head. He didn't want to miss this mission. I'll go up the mountain to find the chief. I'm almost recovered now. I'll definitely be able to go with the team in 3 days. Seeing Wacha go up the mountain, Xiaoxian didn't follow him. Instead, he walked towards the duck shed. The fat green duck poked its head out of the shed. It probably wanted to go out for a walk, but when it saw Xiaoxian, it quickly retracted its head. Opening the door, Xiaoxian saw the fat duck squatting in its nest. It spread its wings to cover the duck eggs. The eggs must be quite hard. Otherwise, the duck would have cracked them. Xiaoxian walked over, ignoring the duck's feathers. Raise your wings. Let me see how many eggs you've taken. The duck didn't move. It hesitated. I'm not going to take yours. I just want to see how many you have, Xiaoxian said. Only then did the duck slowly retract its wings. Stand aside. You're squatting here. How can I see clearly? Xiaoxian waved to the side. The duck moved away reluctantly. Xiaoxian counted. 31 eggs. They were of different colors and sizes. They didn't come from the same nest, but they all hatched well. If they were like the ducklings from before, they would have hatched long ago. Keep working hard. They'll hatch soon. When he left the duck shed, Xiaoxian saw that it was snowing. This year's snow came early. He hoped there wouldn't be a snowstorm during the battle for the mines. Chapter 459. On the mountain, Zheng Luo looked up at the sky. It's snowing earlier than expected this year. In the past, the tribe would have a small hunting event around this time. Even if it was snowing earlier, it wouldn't be so heavy. Duo Kong and the others were worried too. It's fine if it's just a light snow, but I'm afraid there'll be a snowstorm at the salt mines. It would be too difficult to fight in such bad weather. As they spoke, a warrior hurried over. Chief, the shamaness said the weather might be different this year. She wants you all to be prepared. Zheng Luo and the others paled. What they were worried about might actually happen. Since the shamaness said so, the chances were high. This time, they might really encounter a snowstorm. It might even be worse. What else did the shamaness say? Asked Zheng Luo. The warrior's expression was grim too, his voice heavy. She didn't say much. She just wants us to be prepared for the worst. The shamaness had flipped through many records, but none of them were as strange as this year. The snow had come too early, and the change in weather made her uneasy. Prepare for the worst. What else could there be other than a snowstorm? No matter what, even if there was a snowstorm, their mission would proceed without delay. 3 days later, snow was still falling from the sky. Although it wasn't heavy and the ground was not white, it was still troublesome to travel through the forest. Wearing boots made of animal hide and tied tightly with animal tendons, Xiaoxian brought his equipment to the meeting point. This time, Zheng Luo was personally leading the team. He would bring nearly 1,000 people with him, which was close to a quarter of the tribe's population. Among these 1,000 people, most of them were intermediate totemic warriors. The proportion of beginner totemic warriors was not large. They were considered elites. According to Xiaoxian's knowledge, the largest tribe in the forest only had about 5,000 people. There weren't any larger tribes. In the early days, even the 6 strongest tribes didn't have that many people. They only expanded after they left the forest. A team of 1,000 people was considered a high-level operation in the tribe. After discussing with Taiha and Shan Feng, they decided to send 1,000 people each to the salt mines in 3 groups. The first thing they had to do was take back their salt mines, then deal with the Fox and Shun tribesmen. Every tribe that was stationed in the salt mines was definitely more familiar with the territory they were in charge of than others. They had even set up some small traps and so on. It was easier to take back the original territory first, and the chances of success were also higher. When the team left, the fat green duck heard the commotion and came out of the duck shed. It peeked out and only retracted its head when it saw the team leave. It looked at the 31 eggs in its nest. One of the eggs moved, and the fat duck was stunned. It approached the egg and gently pushed it with its beak. Then it gathered the other eggs and hatched them again. It seemed to be in a good mood. The weather was so cold, and it was snowing outside. It didn't need to go out in the cold to look for food. Someone would naturally send food over. It only needed to stay here and focus on hatching the eggs. What a nice place. Xiao Xian didn't know what the duck was thinking. He followed the team in one direction. They parted ways with the Taihe tribesmen for a while. The Taihe tribe would take another route. The Yanjiao team was heading in a direction Xiao Xian had never taken before. Tao Zheng said there were many mountains in this direction. He, Wu Zhan, and Feng had followed the team to guard the mines for a period of time. Those who could join the team and had such experience were all specially groomed by the tribe. They knew more secrets than others. It's snowing. It's even harder to walk, Wu Zhan complained. Everyone hoped that the snow would stop for a while. It had never snowed for so long before. Many people were not used to it. And this was just the beginning. The salt mines were not close to the tribe. Usually, it would take 4 to 5 days to get there. But because of the weather, it took even longer. On the 4th day after leaving the tribe, the snow showed no signs of stopping. In fact, it was getting heavier. The ground was starting to turn white. Zheng Luo looked at the sky and exhaled. Hurry up. Let's rest in the cave first. It was already the 4th day, and they still hadn't reached the place where it used to take 3 days. There was a cave in the mountains ahead that Yanjiao's team used every time they went out or came back. It was used to rest. But there were too many people this time. The cave was very crowded. They started a fire and set up a pot. They went to collect some snow to cook and put some grains in the pot. There were golden grains brought back from King City and purple gold 1,000 grain gold harvested from the tribe. Everyone brought jerky. There weren't enough bowls. The warriors went to look for leaves from an evergreen plant. Each leaf was wide and thick, about the size of 2 palms. After plucking them, they rolled them up and folded the bottom to make bowls. Tired from the journey and shivering from the cold, the warriors ate porridge with jerky. They warmed up quite a bit. With food to replenish their bodies, their fatigue was relieved. The fragrance of the grains made people salivate. More importantly, after drinking it, the warmth that rose in the body and the rapid recovery of physical strength made everyone understand that the grains that they drank were not the ordinary grains that they had exchanged for in Amba City. Just a little bit was enough to make them feel warm all over. The warriors huddled together and laughed. But Zheng Luo and the others were very worried. Thinking about what the shaman said, their hearts sank. It's even colder. Duo Kong sighed. Even when they went hunting in winter, they had never encountered such a sudden drop in temperature. They didn't feel anything in the morning, but when they arrived at the cave in the afternoon, they were all shivering. Yanjiao people were already resistant to the cold. If they were still so cold wearing animal skins, the weather must be strange. Why is it like this? Guangyi was also confused. When things were abnormal, people couldn't help but wonder why this happened. Abnormal occurrences were always accompanied by other things. It was like an omen. Xiao Xian took out a straw rope from his pocket and started tying knots. The others didn't understand Xiao Xian's actions, but Zheng Luo did. Before they left, the shaman had told Zheng Luo to listen to Xiao Xian if there were any abnormal occurrences. When he finished tying the knot, Zheng Luo quickly walked over and asked in a low voice, "How is it?" He didn't dare speak too loudly. The change in the weather already made some of the warriors uneasy. If something else happened, it would affect everyone's mood. Xiao Xian paused and looked at the knot in his hand. He almost didn't succeed this time. "We better leave early tomorrow morning and get to the salt mine in 2 days. Otherwise, we'll be delayed and it'll be worse for us," Xiao Xian said. Get to the salt mine in 2 days? This wasn't a problem. Zheng Luo thought it was possible, but why 2 days? What will happen in 2 days? Zheng Luo asked. Xiao Xian shook his head. I'm not sure. I only know it won't be good. If we get to the salt mine, we'll try to take it down as soon as possible. Xiao Xian had a bad feeling. He always trusted his instincts. If even his divination was unstable, it wouldn't be a small matter. Duo Kong hated the Fox and Shin tribesmen to death. They should have stayed in their tribes in this strange weather. Why did they have to cause trouble? If he met any of them, he would show no mercy. As night fell, the wind outside blew even more fiercely, and the snowflakes scattered with the wind. The white coverage on the ground was getting wider and wider. When they first entered the cave, there were still many exposed rocks outside. Now, they were also covered by the white snow. The The temperature was still dropping. Zheng Luo had people move a few large rocks over to block the wind, but it was still uncomfortable near the entrance. Xiao Xian switched places with the warriors there. Because of the wind, there was no fire at the entrance. It was much colder than inside the cave. However, Xiao Xian had experienced this kind of weather before. Back then, before they had returned to the old haunt, they had experienced endless snowstorms every winter. Xiao Xian's actions left a better impression on the others in the cave. The elder was really a good person. He didn't even know he was labeled a good person. He leaned against the cave wall, deep in thought. When he heard the commotion, he saw Zheng Luo, Duo Kong, and the rest. Tao Zheng, Wu Zhan, and the rest had swapped places too. Xiao Xian, I heard you've experienced this kind of weather before? Duo Kong asked. Xiao Xian smiled. Before the tribe returned to the old land, it snowed all the way until the end of the season. The snow there could even cover the houses. Don't you feel cold? Wu Zhan asked. They were about the same age as Xiao Xian, but their experiences were completely different from Xiao Xian's. They didn't know much about the other tribe. It's cold, but we're used to it. Xiao Xian remembered when he was still in the cave near the foot of the mountain. During the winter, he used to sleep on hay and old animal skins. He wasn't used to it when he first came to this world, but after a while, he got used to it. Did you hear that? It's just a little bit of trouble, and you're all cowering. Duo Kong glared at Tao Zheng and the others. But the situation here is different. I've never seen such a big change. The battle for the salt mine this time might be a little difficult, Xiao Xian said. The others fell silent. They knew the weather was abnormal, and there might be an unexpected disaster. However, they still had to do what they had to do. They were just unlucky to have encountered it. The next day, Zheng Luo led the team to the salt mine. Compared to the night, the temperature was a little higher. There was less snow and the sky was brighter. Everything seemed to be going well. However, Xiao Xian felt that this was just the beginning of a bigger change. They walked harder, and in the afternoon, they arrived at a salt flat. This wasn't where the salt mine was. To reach the salt mine, they had to pass through this salt flat. Above the salt ground, there were many colors. The snow falling from the sky did not cover the colors of the salt ground. Those are salt flowers. They're different from the salt in the mines and salt lakes. The salt flowers here can't be eaten. Chapter 460. At first glance, this salt land looked like a snowfield. Most of the ground was covered in white. There were some shallow pits on the ground. The snow melted after it fell and gathered together. On the snow-white ground, salt flowers emerged from the ground like coral. In the center of each salt flower, the color was either dark or light, red or blue. At first glance, it looked like a fairyland. However, people who knew about this place avoided it like the plague. Although there was salt everywhere, the salt was poisonous. No one who had eaten it or licked it was spared. Therefore, for a long period of time, this place was recognized by everyone as a dangerous place. Anyone who entered would die. There were even Chilu people who said that this was the graveyard of the salt beasts. Whoever approached this place and violated their tombs would be punished. This was a demonized area. It was not until someone walked into this salt land and discovered a salt mine that this dead land was revived. Crack, crack, crack. Subtle cracking sounds could be heard from the shallow pit. Xiao Xian saw an orange-yellow crystal pillar emerging from the shallow pit. It looked as delicate as crystal, sparkling and translucent. The crystal pillar was like a seedling breaking out of the ground. It grew upwards and forked. As it grew, the crystal pillar's surface turned from transparent to translucent. Then it was covered in a layer of white frost. When it reached the height of half a person and stopped growing, it was almost the same as the other salt flowers on the salt land. The only difference was the color. It had a faint orange hue. This was only one of the salt flowers that had bloomed. In the other shallow pits, there were also other salt flowers that had sprouted. The colors were green, red, and even black. Although such a scene was beautiful, when one thought about the legends of this place, it made one's hair stand on end. Let's go. Just don't eat them, said Zheng Luo. Stepping on the salt land, they heard a clear cracking sound. This was the sound of stepping on the salt layer. It was much louder than stepping on the snow. Below their feet were cracked salt crystals of all sizes. Some were lumps and some were flakes. The big ones were stepped on, and the small ones were crushed into powder. The group tried their best to walk on higher ground, avoiding the shallow pits. Their boots were soaked in water. When it dried, salt would seep out. They could not eat it either. It was poisonous. There are footprints. Duo Kong pointed in a direction. Footprints on the ground would stay for a while. Even if the temperature rose, they would not melt as quickly as snow. About 200 people, less than 300. They were here less than 4 days ago. Wacha was very familiar with the salt land. He could tell from the tracks. It's probably a new group of people from the Fox tribe. These don't look like they left behind by the 2 tribes, said Susha. The Fox tribesmen were more orderly when they left, but the Shen tribesmen were even messier. That was why these footprints could not have been left by either of the 2 tribes. We're not resting tonight. Let's continue, shouted Zheng Luo. Usually, they would stop to rest before meeting an enemy to preserve their energy. Even in the past few days, they stopped at night to rest. However, after hearing Xiao Xian's words, Zheng Luo decided to change his approach. There was no piping hot meat soup or porridge to warm the stomach. When they were hungry, they could only gnaw on the frozen meat jerky. The air was filled with the salty smell of the salt ground. Apart from the whistling of the wind, they could only hear the crunching of footsteps on the salt ground. Luckily, the wind was not strong tonight. There was no snow either. Compared to a few days ago, it was much calmer. This kind of peace made it easy for people to slack off, but Zheng Luo kept urging them. Everyone's nerves were stretched taut. No one complained. They only knew that they had to listen to the chief. The chief would never harm them. At the same time, in the salt mine, a few Fox tribesmen and Shin tribesmen in thick fur discussed in a salt cave. This was the Fox tribe's salt cave. The salt below the mine was layered. One layer of rock, another layer of salt, then another layer of rock, then another layer of salt. However, they liked to keep digging until the first layer was finished. Not long ago, they finally dug something out. They didn't expect such a huge surprise. After some consideration, they decided to ally with the Shin tribe. Shan Feng's personality was too strange. The Fox tribesmen did not like them. Yanjiao and Taihe were close. If one knew, the other would not be far away. So, after eliminating these 3, the Shen tribe was the only one left. Although the Shen tribesmen seemed arrogant at times, when it came to fire crystals, they were smart enough to keep their arrogance in check. At this moment, the 6 leaders of the 2 tribes were gathered together. Between them were a few fire crystals the size of an eye. This is what we dug out today. There are more fire crystals below, but the deeper we go, the harder it is to dig. We might not be able to finish digging without at least 30 to 50 days. I'm just worried that the Flaming Horns and Taihe will come over during this period of time, said a rough-looking man dressed in brown animal skin. His hair was loose and his face was rough. He was from the Shen tribe. From what we know, Shan Feng has probably allied with Yanjiao and Taihe. They might come here to steal the ore. Although we use the salt to recruit some people, we still have to be careful. The Yanjiao people are not that easy to deal with, said the Fox chief. They'll come in this weather? The Shin tribesmen were doubtful. If they really came in this weather, they must know the secret of the fire crystals. The Fox chief's face was fierce. They had already given half to the Shin tribe. If they didn't have to guard against the other 3 tribes, they wouldn't have had to give them away. They would not allow anyone else to share the burden. The Shin tribesmen had the same thought. Squeak, a strange squeak came from outside the cave. It sounded like someone was flying towards them. One of the Shin tribesmen raised his hand, and with a whoosh, a gray shadow rested on his arm. It was a bird. It looked like a bird of prey, but it wasn't big. The bird shook its feathers as if it was shivering. Then it called out to the Shin tribesmen. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The Shin tribesmen's expression changed. The Taihe people are coming to the salt mines. They're almost there. They really know the secret of the fire crystals. If the Taihe people are already here, the Yanjiao people won't be far away. The Mountain Wind people must have found out about the fire crystals, so they joined forces with them. Based on the estimated time, they will arrive at the salt mine the day after tomorrow, said the Fox leader after some calculations in his head. The day after tomorrow? Muttered the Shun tribesman. I'm afraid the weather will change in 3 days. We have to change our plans. Speaking of this, the Fox tribesmen were also depressed. They had already made a few plans, but the weather suddenly changed. The Shin tribesmen were very sensitive to changes in the weather. They could predict the changes in the weather from the changes in the trees in the forest. If they said the weather would change in 3 days, or worse, it would definitely happen. We might not be able to stop them if we fight them head-on. Especially those arrogant Yanjiao people. The fox chief was calculating the impact of the three tribes' alliance. Then what should we do? Asked the Shun tribesman, frowning. A woman with long, narrow eyes sat beside the fox chief. Her eyes flashed and she giggled. It's not like there's no other way. The others all looked at the woman. She was dressed in fiery red fur. She stroked a white fox in her arms. The weather will change, but it won't be in 3 days. In 2 days, there will be a huge change. As if responding to her words, the fox in her arms whimpered. 2 days? Are you sure? How do you know? Asked the Shun tribesman. You don't need to know how I know, but I'm sure the weather will change in 2 days, said the woman calmly. She was confident in her words. Even if the weather changes in 2 days, what can you do about it? Well, it's simple, said the woman calmly. When the weather changes, no one can stop it. Once it happens, we can only accept it or find a place to hide. In the salt mines, the only place to hide is the salt caves. You mean? The others started to understand. There were only salt mines opened by the 5 tribes, so the only places to hide were the salt caves of the 5 tribes. But if there's no more salt cave, tell me, when Mountain Wind, Flaming Horn, and Taiha arrive, where can they hide? Destroy their caves. The others' eyes lit up. Taiha will arrive the day after tomorrow at the earliest. Yanjiao and Mountain Wind should be around the same time. We'll destroy their caves tomorrow. When they arrive, we just need to protect our caves. Salt caves are easy to defend but hard to attack. They're stuck outside. When the weather changes, even if they want to destroy our caves, they won't have the time, said the fox chief. That's right. The woman smiled and nodded in agreement. But the salt caves of the 3 tribes were destroyed. What about the people you recruited? Asked the Shun tribesman. Give up your caves and let them hide inside. We'll just send some people to look after them. The most important thing is to protect this place, said the woman. It was not impossible to give up their caves. For the fire crystals, the Shun tribesmen were willing to give up their mines. But what if Mountain Wind and the other 2 tribes take over their caves? So what if they do? If they do, they'll suffer heavy casualties. What are we afraid of? Said the woman. 3 out of the 5 caves were destroyed. Their side was heavily guarded. Even if the last cave was taken over, most of the people who died were the temporary helpers they recruited. So what if they died? It wasn't like they were fox tribesmen. They could even wear down Mountain Wind and the other 2 tribes. Why not? They made a good decision, but they did not know that there was someone who did not play by the rules. They were rushing through the night. Chapter 461. Under the night sky, a group of people ran across the salt flats. The crunching sounds were like the movement of some kind of reptile. The night sky was pitch black, and the group did not light a fire. Zheng Luo wanted to use the glowing stones that Xiao Xian gave to light the way. Even an advanced totemic warrior would not be able to see accurately in such a dark environment. Their vision would be affected. But if he took out the glowing stones, he was worried that they would be too obvious in the dark. They would be easily exposed. They could see a little light in the darkness from afar. Xiao Xian volunteered to lead the way. He had been following the team for a while now, so he knew which areas were more dangerous, which areas to avoid, and which direction the team should head in. He already had a plan in mind. There was no light at night, but Xiao Xian had another special vision ability. The topography of the salt flats was very clear in his special vision. The shallow pits, the salt flowers on the ground, and so on were clearly visible in his vision. With Xiao Xian leading the way, the others did not have to worry about bumping into salt flowers or stepping into shallow pits. If they accidentally tripped and ate a mouthful of salt, they would be poisoned half to death, not to mention following the group. Xiao Xian led the way according to the group's speed during the day. Zheng Luo was suspicious at first, but he relaxed and followed closely behind. The group became a long and narrow formation, one following the other. This reminded Xiao Xian of the games the children played in the early days of the tribe. Also, the first time he went out hunting, he took Mao with him like this. But at that time, they were running for their lives. This time, they were hurrying. After stopping for a while, Xiao Xian distributed the purple 1,000-grain gold to everyone in the group. There was no time or conditions to light a fire, so there was no way to cook porridge. They could only chew. In the wild, the warriors had chewed raw rice too. They were no strangers to it. Even though there was only one, and it was still raw. It was crunchy, but the purple 1,000-grain gold was even more comforting to the soldiers than the golden grains. The tension and exhaustion from traveling in the dark, the anxiety from the weather change that they had never encountered before, and the emotional turmoil before the battle were all gently soothed. It was as if their bodies were soaking in a hot spring. The messy totemic power in their bodies became orderly again. No one spoke, but the atmosphere became more relaxed. Their minds, which had been somewhat muddled in the salt flats, became much clearer. "Let's go," said Zheng Luo. Xiao Xian took a gulp of cold water and led the group forward. The sky gradually turned from dark to hazy. The white salt flats became clearer. It was dawn. Dawn in the salt mines. The chiefs of the Fox and Shin tribes sent their men to the Flaming Horn, Taiha, and Mountain Wind salt caves to start smashing them. The terrain of the salt mines was like a mountain, but this mountain was not very tall. Instead, it occupied a very large area. After the 5 tribes occupied the salt mines, they divided their territories and dug salt caves. There were no high cliffs in the mountain where they dug. When they were digging and mining, the people of the 5 tribes were very gentle when mining. Even the Flaming Horns tribe, which was considered the most rude of the 5 tribes, was also very careful when it came to the salt cave. The rocks in the salt mines got harder the deeper they went. The closer they were to the top, the easier it was to dig. It just so happened that the first layer of salt mine was above, so the opening of the cave was above. The second layer of salt mine was below ground, in a belt shape. Wacha and the others were mining underground, so the upper layer had long been mined out. At the same time, a group of people had gathered above the cave. There were Fox, Shun, and other tribesmen who were recruited as helpers. Each of them held a large hammer or a sharp chisel as they stood there. "Today, your job is to make this cave collapse, do you hear me?" shouted a Fox tribesman. "What about the salt inside?" asked an outsider reluctantly. During their time here, they had received a lot of salt, but the Fox and Shin tribesmen refused to let them in. "Salt. The chief will give it to you. He called you here, so you won't be taken advantage of. You've received a lot of salt these past few days. Is there a problem with the salt quality?" asked a Shin tribesman unhappily. "No, there isn't. After being invited here by the Fox and Shin tribesmen, the salt they received was better than what they usually got. But as time went on, they were not satisfied. People were greedy. The commander standing at the top saw the expressions on these people's faces and secretly mocked them for their ignorance. He was also angry at these people for not being satisfied. However, the leader said that after this incident, it was hard to say if these people would still be alive, so he would satisfy them first. After calming himself down, the person standing at the top asked someone to bring over a woven wooden basket. Inside the basket were pieces of salt that were red and white in color. There was a lot of white, and the distribution was very messy. These salt rocks were all picked from the bottom of the salt cave. Compared to the salt from the top of the cave, the quality was a few grades lower. However, for these outsiders who didn't know the truth, this was enough to make them stare blankly. "So much salt. If you can collapse this salt cave by today, the salt will be yours," the commander standing at the top said. Hearing this, many outsiders rolled up their sleeves, ready to go all out. At the same time, they were thinking about how they could get more salt from the Fox and Shin tribes after the cave collapsed. Why don't they take the risk and steal some? To reassure them, the commander ordered his subordinates to give out half of the salt rocks. If they could complete the mission, the rest would go to them. Boom! A brawny man with a red face stood on top of a rock and smashed down with his hammer. The others also activated their totemic power, stomping on the rocks or smashing down with their tools at the same frequency. The Fox and Shin tribesmen watched from the sides, preventing anyone from entering the cave. The chief had said that if any of them entered, they would be killed. Boom, 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 echoing throughout the rocky area. The salt mines were located within the area of salt flats, but the surroundings of the salt mines were not as flat as the outside of the salt flats. It was full of strange rocks of varying heights, and the rocks were covered with a thin layer of salt grains. Although the salt grains were not poisonous, they were very coarse and did not contain much salt. Even if they had painstakingly collected them, they would not be able to obtain much salt. Therefore, the people of the 5 tribes turned a blind eye to the coarse salt that was full of impurities. Even the foreign tribesmen who had been invited to join them were no longer interested in those things. Boom! A series of loud noises could be heard. It was not only happening here, but the same thing was happening in the other 2 places as well. On top of the strange rocks in the surroundings, coarse salt grains rolled down along with the sound of tremors. At the entrance of the Fox tribe's cave, the Fox chief stood there, holding the woman with the fox in her arms. His eyes were smiling. Everything is going well. As long as we destroy their cave, they'll freeze even if they come here. The woman was smiling too. But the next moment, the fox in her arms stood on end, its thick fur standing on end, making it look like it had swelled up. Woo! 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 The fox struggled out of the woman's arms, wanting to rush out of the cave. But it looked up at the sky in fear, hesitating. "What's wrong?" asked the fox chief. The woman also found it strange. Thinking of something, she suddenly looked up at the sky and said in surprise, "Perhaps the change in the sky will come earlier than we expected." The only thing that could make a fox like her react like this was the change in the sky. The fox chief calmed down. He looked up at the sky. The sun was blocked by clouds, the wind was weak, and there was no snow. The temperature was even higher than yesterday. Everything looked peaceful. It was eerily peaceful. Even the Shun tribe's birds were huddled in a dent in the wall. Like the fox on the ground, they did not fly out at all, as if trying to hide their presence. "It's not necessarily a bad thing that the weather is changing earlier," said the fox chief. The woman thought so too. The workers in the other 3 caves had already started working. With the help of salt, they would definitely work harder. Half a day was enough to collapse the caves. It was just that they wanted the cave to collapse more thoroughly. If it only collapsed a little, it wouldn't be much of a problem for the 3 tribes that were about to arrive. Especially the Flaming Horns who were strong, they could clear out obstacles very quickly. That was why they couldn't give them a chance to escape. "Tell the people in Yanjiao to hurry up. Send another 50 people over," said the fox chief to someone nearby. "Yes, sir." The person who received the order went to look for the outsiders sleeping in the Shun tribe's cave next door. They headed to Yanjiao's cave. At the cave, the area near the entrance had already collapsed. The workers were expanding the collapsed area. "The rocks here aren't that easy to break," said a man wielding a hammer as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Yeah, it gets harder the deeper you go," agreed another. "What are you talking about? Hurry up and break it," shouted a Shun tribesman who was supervising the workers. The Fox and Shun tribesmen were mainly keeping an eye on these foreign tribesmen. If they weren't careful, these people could easily take advantage of them. So they had to keep a close eye on them. Seeing that nothing was amiss, the tribesmen who were keeping an eye on the strange rocks also turned to watch the hillsmiths. But at this time, at the bottom of the salt mine, an angry roar came from the jagged rocks. Zheng Luo's face was ferocious. He had brought his team over to see these people breaking into their cave. He had only held back his anger because he did not want to be discovered. When they finally got close, he could no longer hold it in. Not just Zheng Luo, the others were the same. Chapter 462. The people from the Flaming Horn tribe were divided into 3 small teams. They moved stealthily towards the salt mine from 3 different directions. Each team was led by a warrior who was experienced in guarding the mines. They knew where to go to hide from the eyes of the people in the mines. Although the Yanjiao team had been chased away by force, the traps they set up were still intact. Some had been triggered, but those were the remnants of the traps left behind by others. Their advantage was their knowledge of the strange rocks. They could walk through their territory with their eyes closed. But now the 3 teams were all close to the salt mine. The reason why they were able to proceed so smoothly was because of their experience. The second reason was that most of the people in the salt mine were focused on the people who were smashing the hole. The third reason was that the birds in the sky of the Shun tribe were scared and did not dare to come out. Of course, most importantly, the Fox and Shun tribesmen did not expect Yanjiao to arrive so quickly. Zheng Luo's suppressed anger exploded. He attacked first, his pupils dilating due to his emotions. He mobilized his totemic power to fill every part of his body. The muscles under his skin bulged. Totemic patterns covered his body like hot lava. His angry face looked menacing. He stomped his hind legs vigorously, and his body shot out like a cannonball. The coarse salt on the ground was sent flying. Wherever his eyes looked, there was an area shrouded in killing intent. He tightly gripped the wide copper knife and slashed horizontally. This sudden burst of momentum was like a ferocious beast in the forest that had finally bared its fangs. The cold saber light was like a bolt of lightning that suddenly struck. The air was cut open by the swift and violent blade, making a sizzling sound, like the sound of a storm rubbing against the rough salt grains on the strange rocks. The person closest to Zhongluo was the fox tribesman in charge of guarding this area. Due to the collapse of the cave entrance, he had moved to a different spot. He stood on a large rock near the perimeter and turned around when he heard the commotion behind him. His legs were slightly bent, and his body was still in a dodging motion, but he was still one step too late. He could not avoid the attack in time. The salt-scented knife sliced into his waist. Splat! In the next instant, the knife protruded from the man's back. It was a powerful attack, without any hesitation or obstruction. The sharp blade carried the scent of blood, murderous intent filling the air. The man who was cut in half fell to the ground with a thud. His eyes were still filled with shock and disbelief. After that, Zhongluo didn't put his sword away. Instead, he followed the momentum of his attack and sent the sword into another person's body without hesitation. Like before, the saber did not stop at all, directly slicing his opponent in half. From this, one could see how ferocious this saber was. The blood that spurted out made the red salt on the ground even brighter. The smell of blood spread through the air, mixing with the murderous intent. This sudden turn of events stunned the people who were supervising or smashing the cave. The eyes of the absent-minded supervisors were filled with shock. The people smashing the cave were also stunned by the scene that had just happened. Didn't Yan Zhao and the other tribesmen only arrive tomorrow? Who the hell said that? Was the person who appeared here a ghost? As far as the eye could see, pairs of eyes filled with murderous intent were like hungry predators in the forest. The people in the mine screamed hysterically, "Yan Zhao! It's Yan Zhao!" Sitting, standing, other tribesmen, the Fox and Shin tribesmen all raised their weapons in preparation for battle. Duo Kong rushed up the salt mine from the other side with an axe in his hand. The axe carried the anger of its owner, and it turned into a bolt of lightning as it flew towards the nearest tribesman. Just as the tribesman was about to raise his sword to block, Duo Kong twisted his wrist, and the axe's trajectory changed. The sharp edge of the axe did not hit the tribesman's sword directly, but instead went for his arm. This was the result of the tribesman's quick reaction. If he had been any slower, the axe would have split him in half. Blocking the sword that was coming at him from the side, Duo Kong raised his arm and forcefully pushed it away. He gave the person who had lost an arm a stab with his axe and shouted, "I don't care which tribe you are from. You stole our salt mine. Kill, destroy our salt cave. Kill, kill, kill." He was really angered by the collapsed salt cave in front of him. The rest of the Flaming Horn tribesmen followed suit and let out a series of strange howls. The Flaming Horn warriors who had been quietly moving in stealth no longer had to hold back their anger. They raised the weapons in their hands and charged towards the salt mine. "Stole our salt mine. Kill. Destroy our cave. Kill, kill." What? They weren't from the Fox and Shin tribes, but had been tricked into coming over to help? You think I'm stupid? What are those red and white things in your hands? Meat? Those are salt mines. They might have been dug out from our mines. What are you doing? Mining? Mining my ass. Why would you smash the top of the cave? Even idiots wouldn't do such a thing. You think I'll believe that? Kill, kill, kill. Fight for territory, fight for resources. When conflict broke out, it was always either you die or I die. The ground was littered with small pieces of salt powder. Due to the different impurities in them, they ranged from white to pink to red. At this moment, they were all stained with blood. The battle went from eruption to white-hot in the blink of an eye. The people who were smashing the cave heard the commotion and hesitated on whether to help. If they did, Taiha and Mountain Wind would be here. What would they do? Forget it. Fox and Shun still had many people in their caves. There was no need for them to go. The Shin chief was surprised. Weren't the Flaming Horns always in sync with the Taiha tribe? They rarely sent birds to spy on the Yanjiao people. Unless they were birds that could fly high, the Yanjiao freaks would shoot them down. However, it was much easier to spy on the Taiha people. As long as they knew the situation in Taiha, Yanjiao would know too. But what was the situation now? The Mountain Wind people were nowhere to be seen. The Taiha people were probably still rushing through the salt flats. How did the Yanjiao people get here so quickly? At this thought, the Shin chief couldn't help but regret sending the birds to spy on the Yanjiao people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so helpless right now. The chief of the Shin tribe wanted to send reinforcements, but he quickly stopped because he saw that the Fox tribe had not taken any action. Something was wrong. He looked at the bird curled up in the corner, wishing it could turn into a rock. The Shin chief looked up at the sky. The sky changed. So fast. According to his original plan, It would happen within 3 days. Yesterday was one day, and the weather would change tomorrow or the day after. The fox woman also said that it would happen within 2 days. They didn't feel anything in the morning and thought that the weather would change tomorrow. They made many preparations, but now, everything was messed up. The Shun tribe could tell what was going to happen from the plants around them. 2 days ago, a group of Shun warriors arrived. They said that the plants in the forest were changing strangely. They were afraid something big was about to happen. Perhaps it was a crisis they had never encountered before. Just look at the birds curled up in the corner. They didn't even want to fly. So what if they were humans? How much stronger could they be? Since the weather had changed, they wouldn't send anyone out. The people in Yanjiao's caves would definitely not be able to stop Yanjiao's attacks. For the sake of the fire crystals, they had no choice but to give up on them. Although there was a hiccup, they still followed the plan. The Shun chief brought his people to the fox cave and walked deeper in. It was warmer there. Outside the cave, a snowflake drifted down. The temperature had begun to drop without anyone noticing. It fell so fast that no one had time to react. Soon, more snowflakes fell from the sky. The wind started blowing the falling snow into the air and smashing it heavily onto the ground. Xiao Xian could even hear the soft thud of a snowflake hitting a rock. The warm blood he spat out quickly cooled in the air, freezing into ice. It fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. The wind grew stronger. Large sheets of snow floated in the air like thick curtains. They swirled in the wind, blocking out the distant scenery. Xiao Xian exerted strength in his ankle and dodged to the side. He dodged a knife from behind. The sword in his hand turned into a blur and swept across like a fan, slicing his opponent's neck. Xiao Xian did not stay put. He bent his knees and jumped back, dodging the knife from the side. After dealing with another person, Xiao Xian looked up at the sky, shocked. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. There was a chilly feeling. It was not because of the sudden drop in temperature, but because of something else. The sudden drop in temperature was vexing, but not enough to make Xiao Xian feel this way. It was as if something else was happening. The snow was still falling. The wind blew the snow, blinding everyone's eyes. The sky seemed to be dyed white by the fluttering snow. On the ground, the snow and salt were indistinguishable. The temperature did not stop falling. On the vast salt flats, the water in the shallow ponds was rapidly freezing. The salt blossoms seemed to have met another spring as they swelled and grew larger. If Xiao Xian was still on the salt flats, he would have seen hundreds of flowers fighting for their beauty. In Yanjiao's salt caves, some of the foreign tribesmen recruited by the Fox and Shun tribesmen were already thinking of retreating. If it were any other day, they would have fought for their lives here for the salt. But this was the first time they had encountered such weather. They panicked and lost focus. Their movements showed flaws and many of them were killed. The Fox and Shun tribesmen, on the other hand, were anxious that no reinforcements had arrived. With Yanjiao's advantage in numbers and strength, they were at a disadvantage. End this quickly. Quick! Xiao Xian shouted. Just now, Xiao Xian felt his scalp go numb. He had a bad feeling. Chapter 463. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, Zheng Luo sped up. On one side, he was aggressive and murderous. Both his battle power and aura were far superior to the other side. The Fox and Shun tribes did not send any more people here. The 400 people here were quickly dealt with. Some died, some ran away. Due to the suppression of numbers and psychological panic, as well as the weakening of momentum, the battle did not last long. From the moment Zheng Luo rushed over to the end of the battle, only 5 minutes had passed. 5 minutes was not even enough time to roast meat or take a nap. Usually, no one would care about such a small amount of time. But here, at this point in time, things had changed strangely. The temperature dropped rapidly. Strong winds blew with heavy snow. Around them, they could hear the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground. The originally light snowflakes could cause such a commotion. It was clear how strong the wind and snow were. The blood on the ground quickly solidified. Another layer of snow covered it. The color of the blood and salt was quickly covered by snow. Soon, not a speck of red could be seen. Looking into the distance, all they could see was a vast expanse of snow. Some of the warriors wanted to chase after the fleeing fox tribesmen, but they were held back. Stop chasing them. Move the rocks out of the cave. Xiao Xian stopped the bloodthirsty men. Move the rocks, said Zheng Luo. The red-eyed warriors were panting heavily. Out of habit, They wanted to shake their hands to shake off the blood on the weapons in their hands. However, they realized that the blood on the weapons had already solidified. Ignoring the coagulated blood, they applied medicine to the injured. Other than the few taking care of the injured, Zheng Luo called the others to move the rocks out of the cave. Luckily, they arrived quickly. Other than the collapse of the cave, the rest of the cave was fine. The stones piled up at the entrance of the cave were picked up one by one and thrown far away. With so many warriors coming over, all the stones blocking the entrance of the cave were cleared away very quickly. Except for the big stones that were used to block the entrance of the cave, all the other stones were cleared away. Zheng Luo brought a group of people in first to check if there were any other traps or dangers in the cave. After making sure everything was fine, he let everyone bring the injured into the cave. The bodies of the dead warriors were also brought in. These dead warriors would be abandoned and brought back to the tribe for cremation. The tribesmen were already used to this kind of thing. Although there were casualties, it was fortunate that there weren't many of them. After all, they had the upper hand. After comforting them, Zheng Luo walked to the cave entrance and looked into the distance. The wind and snow filled the sky, making it impossible to see the scenery in the distance. Duo Kong, you stay here. I'll bring some people out to take a look. Zheng Luo called a few people out. There was a blizzard outside the cave. He wondered how the people from Taiha and Mountain Wind were doing. Fortunately, they listened to Xiao Xian's words and hastened their journey. They didn't rest at night. Thinking about this, Duo Kong looked around. He wanted to talk to Xiao Xian again and ask him if he had any other suggestions. But after looking around, he didn't see anyone. Where's the elder? Duo Kong asked the warrior beside him. The soldier pointed into the cave. It seems to be in there. Xiao Xian helped take care of the injured for a while. He had brought many herbs and some 1,000 grain gold with him. These were all needed by the injured. Wacha led the warriors who had guarded the salt mines into the depths of the cave. Soon they came out with a clay cauldron. They gathered some firewood from the cave and lit it. Then they gathered some clean snow. Everyone took out the grains they had and cooked a pot of porridge. Xiao Xian put a handful of 1,000 grain gold into the pot. There were people watching here, so he didn't need to keep an eye on them. When Duo Kong came over, Xiao Xian was about to walk deeper into the cave. Xiao Xian, how long do you think this weather will last? Duo Kong asked. Xiao Xian shook his head. I don't know, but it's definitely more than that. We should be prepared. Duo Kong nodded. I know this is just the beginning. If not, the Fox and Shin people wouldn't be hiding in the cave. The Shin people are very sensitive to changes in the weather. Seeing that Xiao Xian seemed to have something to say but hesitated, Duo Kang's heart tightened. Is there something else? I'm not sure either. I just have a bad feeling, Xiao Xian said. Duo Kong didn't dare to let his guard down. After going through so many life and death situations, his instincts were very sharp. If Xiao Xian said this, he must have his reasons. Even now, he still didn't know what was going to happen. I'll get someone to check if there's anything left in the cave, Duo Kong said. After the Fox and Shin people chased away the Yanjiao mine guards, they went into the cave and looted everything. They took most of the food and necessities, only leaving behind a large ceramic cauldron. There were a few cauldrons in the cave, but they were all destroyed. This one was missing a leg, so it couldn't be placed properly. They had to use a rock to prop it up, and Wacha was using it to cook porridge. After checking the cave, Duo Kong cursed. The other warriors followed suit, cursing the Fox and Shin tribesmen, as well as the other tribesmen they found. Not long after, Zheng Luo returned with a dark expression. How is it? Xiao Xian asked. The cave entrance collapsed. It's worse than here, Zheng Luo said. Due to the sudden appearance of the Flaming Horn tribesmen, the destruction of the Flaming Horn cave was temporarily interrupted. However, the destruction of the other two caves continued. Although it was only 5 minutes, because the overseers heard the commotion here, they also joined in the destruction of the caves. That was why the situation there was more serious than here. Of course, if the people from Taiha and Mountain Wind came, they would just have to spend some time to move the rocks away. Because of Yanjiao's early arrival and the sudden change in the weather, the excavation work was interrupted. Let's not worry about that for now. Send someone to keep an eye on the Fox and Shin people. If anything happens, report it immediately, Zheng Luo ordered. As expected, things did not go well for them this time. Stealing the salt was easy, but the unpredictable weather made it even more difficult than facing the Fox and Shin tribesmen. It was still snowing outside. Traveling in the snow would be even more difficult. The Taiha and Mountain Wind people might not arrive on time. They took turns to rest. In this weather, it was not wise to look for the Fox and Shun people. They could only wait in the cave for the weather to improve and for the Taiha and Mountain Wind people to arrive. Xiao Xian had Wacha bring him deeper into the cave. He wanted to take a look. Duo Kong and Zheng Luo followed. Is the place where the Fox and Shin tribesmen dug out the fire crystals? Is it down there? If we keep digging, will we find fire crystals too? Duo Kong asked. That's possible. Wacha was full of anticipation. Since we have nothing to do, why don't we dig? If they did, it would be a relief. Their energy would be replenished quickly, and they would have more energy for the next battle. There was no time to lose. Zheng Luo immediately called for his men to go to the lower level of the cave. They chose a spot and started digging. The fire crystals were very attractive. The deeper we go, the harder the rocks are. Who knows when we'll get one? Duo Kong said. No matter what, we have to try. Zheng Luo took out his tools and started digging. All the mining tools had been moved away, but there were still some spare tools hidden in a hidden place. Wacha went over and took them out. In the past, he just wanted to hide them to prevent the warriors from wasting too much. If they felt like their tools were missing, they would have to get new ones. This restricted the use of tools. The warriors would only ask Wacha for new tools when they could no longer use them. Now, these hidden tools had come in handy. Dig. Keep digging. If the Fox people can dig, I don't believe we can't. Duo Kong waved the tools in his hands as he spoke. There are fire crystals down here. Xiao Xian said as he sensed the ground beneath his feet. It wasn't that the others couldn't sense the fire crystals. It was just that everyone's sensitivity was different. However, there were too few people like Xiao Xian. Even Zheng Luo couldn't sense the fire crystals directly. Really? Zheng Luo and Duo Kong looked up at Xiao Xian. How much further? Xiao Xian walked around and stepped on the ground. This is the closest, but I'm not sure how deep it is. It's okay, as long as it's here. Zheng Luo quickly gave up on the shallow pit and came over to Xiao Xian's side. Xiao Xian didn't go over to dig, not because he was lazy, but because he had a feeling that his heart was trembling, a sense of crisis. He knew this wouldn't happen for no reason. He had been searching for the reason. So while Zheng Luo and the others were digging, Xiao Xian sat beside them. He sat on a piece of salt that was just dug out and had a lot of impurities. He was deep in thought, sensing carefully. Zheng Luo and the others didn't think much of Xiao Xian's actions. They didn't need Xiao Xian to dig for fire crystals. There were more people around. If Zheng Luo didn't want to, he and Duo Kong could just stand aside and watch. That day, the sky turned dark early. In the evening, the outside of the cave was half buried in snow. Where do you think Taiha's men and Mountain Wind's men have gone to? Don't tell me they froze to death in the salt flats? Duo Kong said as he drank the porridge he just cooked. Most of the pottery utensils were destroyed, and there were no bowls. They were now using the stone bowls Xiao Xian made. The stone was made from rocks near the top of the salt flats. The rocks there weren't hard, and it was easy to make. There was a small amount of salt in the rocks, and the porridge tasted salty after being added. After drinking the porridge, Duo Kong shivered and jumped twice. He rubbed his hands. Today was the coldest day of winter he had ever experienced. However, the next day, Duo Kong found that he was too naive. The next day was even colder than the day before. When he woke up in the morning, the snow outside the cave had accumulated to a height of 3 meters. Xiao Xian, you said the house was covered in snow. Is this what you meant? Duo Kong pointed at the vast expanse of white. Yes, but I've never seen it become like this overnight. Xiao Xian was also shocked by the situation. If this continued, what would become of this place? He wondered how the tribe was doing. Chapter 464. Taiha and Wind only appeared on the third day after Yanjiao's arrival. By then, the snow on the ground was already 5 meters high. The snowstorm had stopped for a day, but now it was starting again. It seemed to be even worse than the first day. The cold wind blew like a knife, blowing on his face and causing him to feel pain. Even the Flaming Horn warriors, who boasted of their tough skin and tough muscles, were not willing to go out unless it was their turn to guard. They all stayed in the cave to rest. There was little firewood in the cave, so other than cooking porridge, they used it sparingly. When the snow stopped yesterday, Zheng Luo brought some people to the salt mines. Other than the 2 caves blocked by rocks and thick snow, the Fox and Shin caves were heavily guarded. It would be difficult to steal anything from there. He did not want to waste his strength, so he returned after observing for a while. When Zheng Luo heard that Taihe and Mountain Wind had finally arrived, he was holding the first fire crystal he dug out, excited. Before they dug it out, he and the others had felt the presence of the fire crystal. It was proof that there was a fire crystal below, but because it was buried too deep and because of the salt mines, they did not notice it. Now they were finally close. They had worked so hard to dig it out, of course they could not stay calm. Taihe's people? When he heard the report, Zheng Luo looked away from the fingernail-sized fire crystal in his hand and calmed himself down. He reluctantly climbed out of the hole and handed the fire crystal to Duo Kong. You guys keep digging. I'll go check on them. I wonder how they're doing now. Don't worry, Chief. I'll keep an eye on them. Duo Kong carefully took the fire crystal, so happy his mouth was about to split. Their efforts were worth it. Their gloomy mood had dissipated. Xiao Xian was deep in thought, but Zheng Luo's sudden appearance brought him back to reality. Taihe and Mountain Wind are here? Xiao Xian stood up from the rock and followed Zheng Luo out to take a look. Zheng Luo glanced at Xiao Xian but did not ask. For the past 2 days, Xiao Xian had been acting strangely. He would sit there for most of the day. If no one called him, he would just sit there. No one knew what he was thinking. He had asked once, but Xiao Xian had told him that he was just trying to sense something. Once the results are out, I will definitely inform everyone. Arriving at the entrance of the cave, he saw the leaders of Taihe and Mountain Wind, each leading about 20 people. None of them looked too good, and there was still snow stuck to their bodies. Taihe and Mountain Wind's leaders relaxed when they saw Zheng Luo. They smiled bitterly. You're really lucky to have come early. Otherwise, you'd end up like us. While they were waiting here, the two leaders had already learned from the Yanjiao soldiers in the cave that the Yanjiao troops had arrived early on the day of the change. They had just arrived when a snowstorm struck. Unlike them, when they were in the salt flats, the weather changed and there were casualties along the way. This kind of weather was something they had never encountered before. Not to mention them, even their ancestors had never encountered such weather. Not only were there unnecessary casualties, but the journey was also seriously delayed. They could have arrived yesterday morning, but they were delayed by another day, and that was the result of rushing through the night. After the change, it was difficult to travel on the salt flats, especially with the thick snow and cold weather. No one could adapt. Zheng Luo did not explain whether they were lucky or not. He asked about the two tribes and found out that although there were casualties, there were not many. Both tribes were not in good health, especially the people from Mountain Wind. The place where they lived was warmer than the Flaming Horn tribes. The winter wind was blocked by the mountains next to them. Even if it snowed, it was just for show. They had never encountered a situation like this before. Mountain Wind's casualties were more serious than Taihe's, so it was no wonder that their leader's face was so dark. How's the cave? Asked Zheng Luo. When he brought people over, both sides of the cave had collapsed, but all they had to do was throw the rocks away. If there's a need, we Yanjiao can help move the rocks too. But Zheng Luo's words made the two leaders' faces even darker. They looked like they wanted to bite someone, their teeth chattering clearly. Don't mention it. Those bastards from the Fox and Shin tribes, they poured salt poison into the cave. The Fengshan chief roared angrily. Salt poison was a kind of green-gray salt rock found in the mines. It couldn't be used to make salt. It wasn't able to poison people to death, but after it was boiled, the smell would be pungent, and people would feel dizzy if they smelled it too much. Therefore, generally speaking, the soldiers guarding the mines would bury the salt rock far away if they found it. Although there was not much salt poison, there was still a certain amount accumulated over the years. The Fox people dug out the poisonous salt rocks and cooked them in batches. The first 3 pots were poured into the Mountain Wind's cave. Who asked them to have such a deep grudge with them? If Mountain Wind did not investigate again, things would not have turned out this way. The 4th to 6th pots were poured into the Taihe cave. The Taihe people were better at using herbs, something the Fox people were wary of. Finally, it was Yanjiao's turn. But due to the change in weather, they changed their plans and did not have time to pour the last of the salt poison into the cave. So when the Yanjiao people entered the cave, although they lost a lot of things, they did not have to deal with the salt poison. After boiling, the salt poison would melt in water. If it was boiled again, it would become a viscous liquid. When it was splashed on the ground, it would seep into the salt mine. Once it dried, it would stay with the salt mine. Unless that layer was removed, it would not be pleasant. In this weather, the snow was howling and the temperature was unprecedentedly low. They finally made it to the mines without having to fight, but there was nowhere to hide. The two chiefs of the Taiha and Mountain Wind tribes arrived at the salt mines at about the same time. They came over to check on the Flaming Horn tribe. They didn't expect the Flaming Horn tribe to come early and live a good life. At least compared to the other two tribes, it was pretty good. They did not ask for much. They just wanted to find a place to hide from the cold and rest. Everyone in the team was walking in a daze. If they fought the Fox and Shin tribes now, they would be in big trouble. After hearing about the situation, Zheng Luo pursed his lips. He did not know Yanjiao was so lucky. The Fox people must have been behind the salt poison. If not for the change, their cave would have been affected too. Not only would they have to face the collapse of the cave, even if they went in, they would be suffocated to death. How cunning. Come over. It'll be a bit crowded, but the cave can fit all of you. Right, do you have any firewood in your cave? Bring some over, said Zheng Luo. Hearing Zheng Luo's agreement, the two chiefs relaxed. I'll ask around. We'll bring it over if there's any. The salt poison on the ground had already seeped into the salt mines underground. It would take a long time to get rid of it. With the weather like this, it was best to hide in the Flaming Horn tribe for a while. Zheng Luo told the warriors in the cave to make room for them. Don't take up too much space. Taiha and Mountain Wind were allies now. Helping them was helping themselves. Not long after, the Taiha and Mountain Wind chiefs came over with their own people. Looking at the Flaming Horn people's state of mind, then looking at the despondent faces of their own people, the two chiefs felt terrible. His hatred for the Fox and Shin tribes deepened as well. It was a bit crowded to fit 3,000 people in one cave. If not for the fact that the cave had 2 levels and each level was dug deep, it would not have fit so many people. There was an empty path on the left side of the cave entrance. That way, it would be convenient to come and go. Even if there was an emergency, it would not be delayed. That way, the cave was practically packed. Taiha and Mountain Wind had brought some firewood over. They had their own stash too. Since Fox's men had not taken all of it, they brought it over. But there was not much firewood. No one knew how long this weather would last. They had to use it sparingly. Other than cooking, they could not light a fire. Luckily, the Yanjiao people had glowing crystals to light up the cave, so it was not pitch black. There were too many people and the cave was too deep. With less air, it would be even more difficult to breathe. Of course, they had considered this problem when they dug the salt cave, so there were several vents in the cave. However, when the Flaming Horns first came in, they blocked a few of the vents because of the cold wind. Now that there were so many people, it was difficult to breathe, so the blocked vents were opened again. 2 of them were blocked because of the blizzard. It took some effort to open them. Even so, the cave was still stuffy. But the advantage of squeezing so many people together was warmth. But, what's that smell? Who's farting? Hey bro, have you stepped on animal dung before? Who had the time to shower and clean up after rushing all the way here? There was a lot of dirt on their bodies too, and this was the result of being washed away by the snow. Now that they were resting in the cave, with the poor air flow, the stench of sweat, feet, farts, and all sorts of weird smells mixed together. But even so, this was much better than salt poisoning. This was what the Taiha and Mountain Wind people thought. After the weather changed, this was the most comfortable time for them. The Yanjiao and Taiha people were more familiar with each other. They huddled together and started chatting. Although they quarreled in the tribe, they had always been partners. Now that they were in the same boat, they felt like fellow sufferers. Someone started cursing the Fox and Shun people, and it resonated. Even the Mountain Wind people, who had been quiet since entering the cave, joined in the commotion. They hurled out vulgarities that were unique to their respective tribes. The Taiha and Mountain Wind chiefs were brought over by Zheng Luo to see the fire crystals. Now that the existence of the fire crystals was confirmed, the 2 chiefs felt less gloomy. The 3 chiefs picked up their tools and started digging for the crystals. They were in a bad mood, but they could not find anyone to fight. They could only turn their anger and frustration into motivation. Digging out more fire crystals would also allow the warriors to recover quickly. Outside the cave, the snow that was 5 meters high in the morning was now a meter higher. The snow was still falling, showing no signs of stopping. Chapter 465. On the night of Taiha and Mountain Wind's arrival, the wind outside grew stronger. Snow filled the sky, and even the guards outside the cave couldn't handle it anymore. Zheng Luo had no choice but to call them in and take turns guarding the entrance. Otherwise, they would freeze to death outside. Even if they didn't freeze to death, they would be buried in the snow. But now, outside the cave, unless all the snow was swept away, the surrounding snow was like a thick wall, blocking all sight. One had to stand on high ground and sweep away the snow that blocked one's vision before one could see further. Xiao Xian stood on top, braving the wind and snow to look around. Between heaven and earth, everything was white. The strange rocky terrain was no longer rugged. It was drowned in a sea of white. At first glance, it looked like flat ground. Xiao Xian tried to use a straw rope to perform divination. He wanted to read the weather, as well as the chilling sense of danger that he couldn't understand. None of his attempts worked. He looked around. As far as he could see, there was no one else. Fox and Shin did not seem like they wanted to come out. After entering the cave, they moved the rocks back to their original positions. Many of the Yanjiao warriors looked at Xiao Xian, hoping to hear good news from Xiao Xian. It was because of Xiao Xian that they weren't as miserable as Taihe and Mountain Wind. To their disappointment, Xiao Xian shook his head silently. The cave grew quieter. At first, there were still people complaining and cursing the Fox and Shin tribesmen. But now, all their complaints were gone. They only hoped that this weather would end soon. Wu Zhan and some of the Taihe tribesmen knew each other. They were all elites of the younger generation. When the Taihe tribesmen arrived, they gathered to talk about their experiences. Now no one was talking. Those who could sleep slept to reduce their energy consumption. Those who couldn't sleep just stared blankly. Hearing chewing sounds beside him, Wu Zhan kicked him. "What are you chewing?" "Grass." "Give me some." Taihe tribes Feiyong handed over half a stalk of grass. They would often carry some herbs with them, even if they didn't have much medicinal value. They would chew on these herbs for fun when they were bored and could calm their minds. When he handed it over, Feiyong asked, "Your elders don't seem to have brought any good news." "There will be." Wu Zhan didn't say anything. He took the grass and chewed on it. It tasted bitter. He didn't know why the Taihe people liked to chew on this stuff. There was bound to be one. Everyone thought so. However, as the days passed, their hearts grew heavier and heavier. Every day, when they woke up or went out to pee, they would be shocked by the changes outside. It was as if there was no limit, and they didn't know where the limit was. This kind of change made people panic. If this continued, would the forest they lived in become a land of ice and snow? The thoughts of the younger warriors began to wander aimlessly. It was one thing for them to be in the land of ice and snow. Some of the tall mountains were covered in ice and snow all year round. However, they had never seen a place with such thick snow. This was an ordinary flat ground, and the snow was still falling. There were a few short pauses in the middle, but this trend showed no signs of stopping. What should we do? The three chiefs gathered together. Even though they had fire crystals in their hands, the current situation put them in a difficult position. Their initial excitement from digging up fire crystals had gradually died down. They definitely had to fight the Fox and Shin people. They had to come all this way and pay such a high price. Everyone was frustrated. However, this frustration was suppressed by the changes in the weather. They fell silent with bitter expressions. The burden on their shoulders was heavy, and they were under immense pressure. They didn't know what would happen to them, or if their tribe was safe. "If we knew this would happen, we wouldn't have come even if we had to give up the mines," said the Mountain Wind chief in a low voice. But who would have expected such a huge change? Even the Fox and Shin tribesmen underestimated this change. The Taihe chief sighed helplessly. Who wouldn't regret it at a time like this? Seeing that Xiao Xian did not speak, walking back to the rock he had been sitting on for the past few days to continue spacing out, the three chiefs couldn't help but feel disappointed. The other two chiefs already knew that Yanjiao could avoid the change in weather because of Xiao Xian. They had no one who could predict the weather, so they could only place their hopes on Xiao Xian. Good news or bad news, as long as they knew what was going to happen next, they would feel more at ease and be prepared. Sigh. Zheng Luo couldn't take it anymore. Whenever he was free, he liked to think. He stretched his stiff limbs, then jumped into the fire crystal pit and continued digging. The other two chiefs looked at each other, then got up to stretch their shoulders and jumped in as well. Let's dig. They would be more depressed if they stayed here quietly. Their progress was much slower now. The deeper they went, the harder the rocks became. Many of their digging tools were broken. Although they dug out more than 10 fire crystals, they were small and not enough to go around. Everyone absorbed a little, and it also gave the warriors a boost of energy. Xiao Xian sat on the converted salt rock and carefully felt the changes around him. Sound. He could hear the three chiefs digging in the pit next to him. Everyone's breathing could be heard clearly. Further away, there were whispers in the cave. Some were talking in their sleep, some were snoring. He could even feel that many people were spacing out in the dark with their eyes wide open. There was also the sound of wind blowing in through the vent. What else was there? There was also the sound of someone's heartbeat. Xiao Xian could almost hear the sound of his blood flowing in his body. Thump thump. The sound of the heartbeat made Xiao Xian's eyebrows twitch. The sound of a heartbeat? The sound was very soft, but it felt very powerful. It seemed to echo in the rock, with a lingering sound. His own heartbeat? No, not his own, not the people around him, and definitely not the other soldiers in the cave. Who is it? Whose heartbeat? Xiao Xian wanted to listen again to confirm, but after waiting for a while, he did not hear the sound again. Xiao Xian felt that he was very close to the answer, but he still felt like he was missing something. Just a little bit more. Just as Xiao Xian thought that the sound would not appear again, he heard it again. Thump thump. It was still the same strong heartbeat as before, high in the front and low in the back. After listening carefully, Xiao Xian noticed that the last heartbeat was slightly louder than the previous one, but he wasn't sure if it was real. There was indeed a heartbeat, but it did not sound like a human's. It seemed to be very far away, but also very close. He could not be sure. It was not loud, but he could clearly hear the sound coming from the rock layer. "Chief, do you hear something?" Xiao Xian asked. Zheng Luo, who was digging in the fire crystals, paused. Sound. The other people in the pit also stopped what they were doing and listened carefully. No. They all shook their heads. "It's gone now, just now," Xiao Xian said. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, the others in the pit stopped digging and focused on listening to all the sounds in the cave. What kind of sound was it? The cave was too noisy, they had to figure it out. A heartbeat. It was not loud, but it felt very strong. It seemed to come from the rock layer, and there was an echo, Xiao Xian said carefully. That was even more puzzling. How could there be such a sound? The people in the pit were all patient. Their patience had been tested countless times during the hunt, so they were quite patient. However, after they stopped all their movements and listened carefully, they still did not hear Xiao Xian's voice. Zheng Luo was about to speak when Xiao Xian suddenly said, "There was another sound, did you hear it?" The three chiefs looked at each other, seeing the confusion in each other's eyes. It was clear that they did not hear it. When he looked at Duo Kong and the others, he saw that they were equally confused. "You really heard it?" Zheng Luo asked again. "I heard it 3 times, Xiao Xian said confidently. Now the three chiefs were not calm. It was not that they did not want to believe Xiao Xian. It was just that they really did not hear the sound Xiao Xian was talking about. The Taiha and Mountain Wind chiefs did not dare compare to Xiao Xian in predicting the weather. After all, Xiao Xian's predictions had been proven correct. However, they were confident in their hearing. It was not like they could not hear anything. The other 2 chiefs were skeptical, but Zheng Luo believed him. Xiao Xian was different from the others in many ways. The shamaness also believed in Xiao Xian. Therefore, Zheng Luo's expression was serious. If there really was such a sound, Xiao Xian, what do you think it was? I don't know. But the source of that sound is something I've always been wary of. Xiao Xian spoke his mind. Zheng Luo threw down the tools in his hand and climbed out of the hole. He said to Duo Kong, "Inform the others to be alert." Duo Kong did not waste time. He threw down the tools and ran away. His voice could be heard shouting as he ran. Seeing Zheng Luo like this, the other 2 chiefs were still suspicious. However, since the Yanjiao people were acting like this, they followed suit. The originally silent cave suddenly burst into an uproar because no one knew what was going on. Stay alert? Was some kind of danger coming? Xiao Xian, continue listening. Let us know if you find anything. Zheng Luo sat down beside Xiao Xian. He no longer cared about the fire crystals. They were important, but compared to the number of people in the team, it was secondary. The other 2 chiefs each carried a piece of salt and sat beside Xiao Xian. They wanted to see what this young Yanjiao elder had heard. At the same time, in the Fox tribe's cave on the other side of the mine, the Fox chief woke up after a nap and ran over to check on the progress of the fire crystals. "How's it going?" asked the chief. The supervisor beside the hole pointed at the basket by his feet. There were not many more crystals. The Fox chief frowned. It was getting slower and slower. He was dissatisfied with the efficiency. However, the deeper they went, the more crystals there were. They could only wait patiently. Continue. Don't let me find out who's slacking off. Yes, sir. At the bottom of the hole, one of the Fox tribe's warriors dug with his shovel. He heard a clang and thought he had hit rock again. There was no more salt here, only rocks and soil. He had hit hard rocks a few times these few days, but this time, his tool was badly damaged. Shit! Looking at the deformed copper shovel, the warrior threw the shovel in his hand away, picked up a few new tools, and continued to dig. I want to see what kind of rock this is. Chapter 466. Clang. The second shovel went up. The blade of the shovel was deformed again, but there was no trace of the stone on the ground. Hey, I don't believe that I can't get it out. The man used the deformed shovel to scrape away the dust on the ground and some small stones around him. After wiping away the dust, he finally saw the stone. There was a small torch on the wall of the pit next to him. With the weak light, the man saw a piece of white on the ground. The color was like frozen snow, and it reflected the light. Could it be that he found a treasure? The man was overjoyed. While he was happy, someone squeezed over. What is this? Let me see. Hey, why are you squeezing over? I dug it out. The man shouted. What's wrong? The others in the pit heard the noise and came over. They saw the white on the ground and looked at it carefully. They didn't know what it was. They had never seen it before. Is this ice? Someone said. Let me touch it. It's cold, but it's not ice. It's hard. Someone squatted down and touched it with his hand. It's not ice. I think it's a kind of crystal. An older man guessed. Crystal. Not only the man who found the stone first, but the others' eyes also lit up. Crystal was good. Although the price was different, even if it was only used for decoration, it would sell well in the city. Especially the slave owners, they liked it. However, in this salt mine, in this place where the fire crystals existed, it might be something extremely precious. Didn't you see that 2 of the shovels were broken? I'll report to the chief. The man with the fastest reaction rushed out of the pit and went to the chief to ask for credit. The others were slower. They stomped their feet in annoyance. Why are you in such a hurry? Are you in a hurry to die? The man who dug out the suspected crystal didn't leave. He was guarding his own piece of land. So what if someone went to ask for credit first? He dug out this piece, and the chief would reward him handsomely. The others in the pit were quick-witted. Seeing that there was a white piece under the man's feet, they quickly picked up their tools and quickly dug down. The others also reacted. Since the fire crystal was not only found in one place, then did they have such a crystal under their feet? That person had only dug deeper than them. Sure enough, after a short while, there was another crisp sound of metal colliding with hard objects. Haha, I found it too. Me too. Same here. After removing all the rocks and soil, the people in the pit found that the ground beneath their feet was filled with this kind of white crystal, all of it. They couldn't find the edge at all. Perhaps this crystal was much bigger than they had imagined. It was an entire crystal slab. Hiss so hard. How do I pry a piece off? Someone tried a few tools, but only a small mark was left behind. Not a single chip was knocked off, and no digging could be done. Idiot. Prying also requires skill. An experienced excavator proudly turned over a chisel and a copper hammer. The man squatted down and carefully looked at the ground. Then he stopped at a spot and placed the chisel close to the ground. Then he swung the hammer with all his might. Only then did the others notice that this large piece of crystal on the ground was not flat. Instead, it had some wrinkles and some gaps. It seemed to be divided into pieces of similar size and shape. They were almost connected in a hexagonal shape. The edges of each piece were slightly lighter in color. There were bumps and depressions, which should be the gaps. And that person had stuck the sharp edge of the chisel at the bumps or depressions. Then, he held the short shaft of the chisel and used his other hand to swing the hammer and hit the chisel heavily. Clang, clang, clang. If one strike couldn't pry it open, he would hit it a few more times. The hammer flashed, so fast that the knocking sounds seemed to be connected. Ka! The chisel blade rolled up, and a white piece of crystal separated and flew up. The person next to him had sharp eyes and fast hands. He stepped on the wall of the pit and jumped up to grab the white piece that was less than the size of a palm. And the hexagonal mark on the ground was missing a small corner. The person who grabbed the white crystal came to the side of the torch and used the light to observe what this white crystal was. The others also came closer to take a look. The supervisors above all went down to take a look. Crystal, it must be a crystal. Look, there seems to be a pattern on it. What pattern is this? Is it a frozen snowflake? What's a snowflake? This is a crystal flower. Someone showed off his knowledge. It looks like it. The person holding the crystal bit it and shivered from the cold. It's cold. It's so hard. Quick, pry a few more pieces off before the chief comes. The others thought the same. They didn't waste any more time and quickly snatched the chisels and hammers. Those who couldn't snatch anything started fighting. There were not only fox people in this pit, there were also Shin tribesmen. When it came to benefits, it was easy for conflicts to arise. The person who got the chisel started swinging the hammer. The fox chief was discussing with the Shun tribesmen about their gains and future plans. The people they sent out had already found out about Taiha and Mountain Wind's movements. However, the people they sent out to spy on them were discovered and lost. They were killed by the enemy. The three tribes were coming aggressively, and the situation wasn't looking good either. They didn't know if they would come over to snatch their things, so they had to be on guard. They had made long-term preparations. Although they didn't expect the weather to change so drastically, they had food and fur. They also collected a lot of firewood. As they were discussing, the person digging for the fire crystals came over excitedly to report that they had found a new crystal. This was indeed good news. The fox and Shin chiefs stopped talking and hurried over to see what was going on. If it's really a new crystal, I wonder how much it's worth. The Shin chief walked towards the pit with a face full of joy. No matter what, it's a good thing. I told you, you won't lose out on this choice. The fox chief was excited too. Let me see, what kind of crystal is it? They did not notice that the bird from the Shin tribe and the fox from the fox tribe, who had been ignored for a few days, were now trembling all over. They tried their best to hide in a corner, trying to reduce their presence. No one dared to pull them away, no one dared to call them out. They were as still as rocks. It wasn't that they didn't want to make a sound. They were too scared to make a sound. Everyone else thought they were just frozen. In Yanjiao's salt cave, Xiao Xian listened carefully to the heartbeat. The interval between each heartbeat is shorter now, it's louder too. Xiao Xian described what he heard to Zheng Luo and the others. Even if the three chiefs couldn't hear it themselves, their hearts pounded nervously as they listened to Xiao Xian's description. They couldn't hear it themselves, but they had to rely on others to tell them. It didn't feel good. Wait, something's wrong. Xiao Xian's sudden words made the three chiefs jump up. What's wrong? The interval between heartbeats is shorter, it's getting louder. It's changing so fast. Xiao Xian broke out in cold sweat. He didn't know what it was just a physiological reaction. He couldn't control it. The three chiefs' hearts were in their throats. They stared at Xiao Xian, waiting for Xiao Xian to continue. But Xiao Xian's next words made them feel like they had fallen into an ice cave. Chief, I have a guess. Xiao Xian gulped, suppressing the trembling in his heart. He hadn't felt this way in a long time. He still remembered when he got lost during his early days of hunting. You. Tell us. Zheng Luo stuttered. I suspect that there's a king beast down there. Xiao Xian said this sentence word by word. Every word he said was like a hammer hammering into the hearts of the three. King. King. The three chiefs opened their mouths but couldn't finish. King beasts only existed in the records left behind by their ancestors. Most of them had only heard of them. Even the ancestors who left behind the records may not have seen them with their own eyes. They only knew of such creatures from their ancestors' records, from the stories passed down from generation to generation. No one wanted to face a king beast. It was a true king. In the stories passed down, there were many stories of a king beast destroying an entire tribe. They didn't want to know the truth of the stories, but they couldn't deny that no one wanted to meet such a legendary creature. But now, they really hoped that Xiao Xian was scaring them, that it was just Xiao Xian's imagination. A long time ago, I met a king beast. I feel the same way now, Xiao Xian said, suppressing his shock. As for the three leaders beside him, they were all stunned. If they had only felt a little regret before, now they were so regretful that they wanted to bang their heads against a wall. That was a king beast. It was not those random ferocious beasts that they usually hunted. How could they fight it? Even if all the people in the cave worked together, could they really fight it? If not for Xiao Xian, they wouldn't even be able to hear the king beast's heartbeat. Even if the three chiefs fought with their lives, they might not be able to save everyone in the team. This was a dream. This had to be a dream. In the fox cave, The fox and Shin chief went down to the pit and watched the others work. They held a piece of cold crystal in their hands. There was no joy on their faces. Instead, there was an inexplicable sense of panic, so much so that they couldn't breathe. "Wait, stop. Stop prying. I told you to stop prying," the fox chief roared. The others looked at them, confused. They didn't understand why their chiefs were so angry. The pit fell silent. Crack, 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 crack. The soft sounds were very clear in the silence. A soul-stirring pressure, and a chill that seeped into his bones instantly enveloped his entire body. A supervisor in the pit lowered his head stiffly and looked at the sword in his hand. He saw that the tip of the sword that was pressed against the surface of the crystal was beginning to be covered with a layer of white frost. The frost was spreading upwards at a speed visible to the naked eye. The temperature in the pit dropped rapidly, and the two leaders who reacted quickly had already climbed up along the walls of the pit. As for the people who reacted slower, they found that they could no longer walk. Their feet were frozen on the crystal, and they thought that their feet were numb from the cold. But now they found that they were not numb from the cold, but completely frozen, and even their blood was frozen. Whoosh, the white crystal beneath their feet began to move. Frozen, they could only be dragged towards the walls of the pit. They couldn't escape. Even if they chopped off their feet, the frost had already spread past their waists. They couldn't feel their lower bodies anymore. Bang! 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 A series of crashing sounds came from the pit. The fox chief didn't need to look down to know that the people below had been sliced into pieces. Chapter 467. There was a sizzling sound in the cave, like the sound of rocks rubbing against each other. The ground under his feet trembled with these sizzling sounds. White frost quickly spread out from the pit where the fire crystals were dug out. It was like an unstoppable tide, spreading to the surroundings with great force. The fox and Shin chiefs no longer had any other thoughts. They just wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. They were panicking, their faces pale. Perhaps they had realized what was beneath them. They regretted it even more than the flaming horns. Why did they have to dig so deep into the ground? If they had found out earlier that there was an irresistible giant beast below, they would have been extremely careful. Even if it was snowing outside, they would have taken the fire crystals that they had dug out and returned to the tribe through the night. They would have given up the salt mine and everything here, and never come back again. But now it was too late to regret. They had already opened the door to violence under the wind and snow. "Run! Get out of here!" shouted the fox chief. He was no longer calm. Instead, he was filled with panic and despair that even he didn't want to believe. The other fox and Shin people in the cave did not know what was going on. They just felt their hearts skip a beat. It was a sense of oppression and fear. For a moment, their legs turned to jelly. Hearing the fox chief's words, chaos broke out in the cave. Some pushed aside the rocks blocking the entrance and rushed out. Others huddled against the walls. Those who were lying in the cave, those who were sleeping, or those who did not have time to react were trampled to the ground by the people rushing out. They wailed in pain, but no one spared them a glance. Even if they wanted to help, they could not. At this time, even the slowest person would have realized that something strange had happened in the cave. After all, they had lived in the mountains and forests for a long time, so they had a basic ability to predict danger. The stronger ones forcefully pushed the people in front of them aside and squeezed their way out. Due to the limited width of the cave entrance, it was fine when nothing happened. Now that something had happened, everyone wanted to rush out. If they were careless, they would be blocked and people would be squeezed out of shape. The fox chief ran out from the depths of the cave. He stepped on the heads of the people blocking the entrance and rushed out. The others realized this was possible too. They followed suit. Some jumped too high and hit the ceiling, bleeding. They did not even wipe the blood off, continuing to rush forward. Some pushed aside the people in front of them. The cave became more chaotic. The more anxious the people were, the more they felt there was danger. Didn't they see the chief running out? Crack, crack, crack. In the lower layer of the salt cave, the white frost continued to spread out quickly. Some people who were stuck at the back felt that the temperature around them had dropped sharply. The water vapor that they exhaled was instantly condensed. Their skin was frozen into a block without any warmth. Fortunately, they had moved away from the pit and were not close to the fire crystals. Compared to those who were directly frozen, they were in a much better situation. These changes were not limited to the fox's cave. In the Shun cave, more than 500 people were brought here by the Fox and Fox tribes. There were still some before, but they were killed by the Yanjiao people who came to the mines. There were Fox and Shun people in this cave too. They were guarding the deeper parts of the cave. There was still salt to be mined. They were guarding the cave to prevent outsiders from taking it away. At the same time, they were keeping an eye on them to prevent them from digging too. There were more than 1,000 people in the cave. When they discovered the frost in the lower layer of the cave, those guards felt something was wrong. Feeling the power that made their scalps numb, the ground under their feet trembled differently than usual, and hearing the chee-chee sound from the rocks, they immediately fled outside and left this cold place. Similar changes were happening in the other 3 caves. The Yanjiao cave was already covered in white frost. Seeing this, Xiao Xian and the 3 chiefs hurriedly moved out of the way. The change was too sudden and too fast. The ground beneath their feet was covered in a layer of frost. There was no place for them to hide in the cave. They had to step on the frost. Luckily, this only happened in the lower levels of the cave. Although the upper levels were cold too, it was much better. Zheng Luo moved his feet with difficulty and led the warriors from the lower level up. The coldness from the soles of his feet shot up his legs. His blood vessels felt like they were filled with ice. "Should we escape?" Zheng Luo asked Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian shook his head reflexively, then snapped out of it. "I don't know what that is, but I feel like running out like this isn't a good idea. Then stay in the cave for now. Duo Kong, tell the warriors to be quiet and hide their auras. Just like when we were hiding in the forest. Don't show any murderous intent," Zheng Luo said in a low voice. After the initial panic, Zheng Luo had calmed down a little, but his voice was still trembling. It was his first time facing such a situation, and he didn't know what to do. But since Xiao Xian said so, he did as he was told. The Taiha and Mountain Wind chiefs were the same. They didn't dare to doubt Xiao Xian now. They didn't know what to do either. They would do whatever they saw Yanjiao. Because the people from the lower levels had joined in, there was almost no passage in the upper levels. Zheng Luo and the rest had to squeeze through the crowd. But with the 3 chiefs holding the line, no one dared to mess around. When they saw them, they would make space for them to move around. When they reached the entrance, Xiao Xian pushed aside the stone blocking the entrance. They would clear the snow around the entrance every once in a while. Although it wasn't long now, and the snow was half a person's height, it didn't stop them from looking into the distance. It was just that they couldn't see too far. "Someone went out over there," said Zheng Luo when he heard the commotion. He could already hear someone from Fox's side screaming. "Should we go out and take a look?" asked Taiha's leader. Although they were afraid and worried, they were also curious. "Wait!" Xiao Xian stopped them. "Listen." Pust, the stone acted as a medium to transmit the sound. It sounded like something was moving under their feet. The cave was completely silent. Everyone else had been warned, and now they were filled with a sense of crisis. They held their breaths and held their breath. Therefore, the hissing sound in the cave was very clear, and it made the hair on their backs stand up. "It's a big guy. Are we really not going out? The upper levels aren't as sturdy as the lower levels. What if it collapses?" said Mountain Wind's leader. Zheng Luo and the others looked at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was under a lot of pressure. His choice would determine the fate of almost 3,000 people. Intuition. Trust your intuition. "Stay in the cave," said Xiao Xian again. "Then stay in the cave." Zheng Luo gestured to Duo Kong. Duo Kong gulped and squeezed into the cave to tell the other Yanjiao about Zheng Luo's decision. The person who didn't even hesitate when facing the beasts in the forest was trembling now. Taiha and Mountain Wind's leaders looked at each other, their eyes conflicted. The upper levels of the cave really weren't that sturdy, especially near the entrance. Otherwise, it wouldn't have collapsed so easily. It couldn't even withstand the attack of a giant beast, much less a king beast. It would probably collapse with one blow. If the cave collapsed, these people would all be buried. But if they ran away before the giant beast came out, maybe there was still a chance? Who would want to stay here and face a king beast? To wait for death? Even if the cave didn't collapse, they would freeze to death. We, the Mountain Wind chief, had just said 2 words when the Taiha chief said to the person next to him, "We'll do the same as the flaming horns. We'll go in and inform everyone. We'll do whatever the flaming horns do." Mountain Wind's words were stuck in his throat. He wanted to say that they should run, but now, hesitation, still hesitation. "Chief." The people around Mountain Wind's chief, Lan Mu, were already urging them to leave. They were divided into 2 factions. Some agreed with Taiha and Flaming Horn's decision, while others thought that since the fox people had already escaped, they should escape too. We should. Before Lanmu could finish, the sizzling grew louder and the ground shook more violently. It's coming out, whispered Xiao Xian. It's coming out. What do we do? We were planning to run. Lanmu panicked. There was a loud boom. The ground shook, even the snow walls outside the cave shook. The road that had been cleared was once again covered by the snow that had fallen from the sky. Now they couldn't see the situation outside. The cave entrance was pitch black. Screech, a long, coarse sound of salt being swept up by the wind and scraping against the rocks resounded between heaven and earth. At first, it sounded a little hoarse, but it was also sharp, as if it was real, scraping against the nerves in people's heads, causing goosebumps to appear all over their bodies. An uncontrollable feeling of trembling rose up from their bones, and even their hair wanted to stand on end. The sound waves spread and seeped into the cave. The warriors with lower strength had blood flowing out of their ears. They were in a daze for a while before coming back to their senses. However, their hearing was affected for a while. They could not hear the whispers of the people next to them. They could only read their lips. Amidst the long howl, the sound waves were like a fierce gale, blowing away almost all the snow in the salt mine. The 10-meter-high layer of snow shattered into snowballs of different sizes. It was as if time had reversed. They flew into the air and were swept away by the wind. Half of the snow that had covered the cave entrance disappeared in an instant. Xiao Xian reached out and pushed away the snow that was blocking the cave entrance. A gust of cold wind blew into the cave through the gap. At this time, he did not mind the cold. Including the 3 chiefs, the people closest to the cave were all leaning against the rocks or standing on their tiptoes to see the situation in the distance. The snow at the cave entrance fell from 10 meters to less than 2 meters. A white, python-like beast rushed up from a part of the salt mine. When it leaped into the air, it swung its body and wantonly stirred up the snowstorm. It seemed that this kind of weather was not a difficult environment for it. On the contrary, this kind of weather made it very happy. It was so happy that it jumped up. Chapter 468. What is that? Zheng Luo said the 4 words in 2 sentences. It was obvious that the scene just now had shocked him. It wasn't just Zheng Luo. Everyone else in the cave would not be able to stay calm. When they were in the forest, their first thought was how to kill the beast, how to split it, how to eat it, how to use it, how to exchange its skin for something. The moment they saw this giant beast, even though they couldn't see what it looked like due to the snowstorm, they still felt a sense of crisis as they looked at it from afar. They couldn't fight it. That was Zheng Luo's conclusion. It's a snake, right? Do snakes cry like that? Why would they come out in this weather? The 3 chiefs whispered to each other. Outside, the anaconda beast charged out of the salt mine and landed among the strange rocks around the mine. The snow-filled rocks rumbled. The strange rocks were easily swept away like decorations. A single swipe of its tail would bring down a large patch of rocks. All Xiao Xian and the others could see from inside the cave was rocks being swept up into the sky and thrown far away. Duo Kong gulped again. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. This was the first time he felt this way since he was born. The ferocious beasts in the forest, even the most ferocious beasts he had ever encountered, were simply insignificant compared to the one outside. It could sweep away the hard rocks without a scratch on its body. How could its skin even cut through? The anaconda beast leveled the ground in its path, but cleverly avoided the salt mine. All the rocks were swept to the other side, as if it was purposely clearing a path. Xiao Xian even saw people being swept up along with the rocks. However, those people did not have any signs of life, as if they were dead. They were thrown away along with the rocks. Those were the people who had escaped. The chief of the fox tribe had wanted to escape with his men, but they could not. The thick layer of snow and the buried rocks were a huge hindrance to them. Even if they wanted to avoid the beast, they could not just ram their heads into rocks. The giant beast was very fast, heading straight for the fox leader and the rest. Hearing the approaching commotion, the woman in the fox leader's arms tugged at him. Go back. They might not be able to escape, but they could take the risk and return. The fox leader frowned. He did not want to take the risk, but the road ahead was blocked by the thick layer of snow. Even breathing became difficult after a while. Even if he got out of the strange rock field, he still had to face the wider salt field, which was even more dangerous. Moreover, He didn't bring any food when he left the cave. The woman tugged at him again and gave him a look. Let's go back that way. The fox chief gritted his teeth and changed his direction. He turned back, but not the way he came. Instead, he ran towards the Shun cave. He quickly waved the sword in his hand, sweeping away the thick layer of snow in front of him like a broom. He could also recognize the path ahead. If the sword hit a rock, he would go around it. Seeing this, some people followed him. Along the way, they met the chief of the Shun tribe and other people. Perhaps they all had the same idea and walked in the same direction. Other than them, there were others who returned too. However, they didn't head towards the Shun cave. Instead, they went back the way they came. Although they had missed the direction of the giant beast's sweep, the crisis was not over yet. Previously, when they escaped from the salt cave, they had a hard time avoiding all kinds of rocks. Now, in a large area near the salt mine, there was nothing left except for some traces of rocks on the ground that could easily trip people. There was no thick layer of snow, no irregular rock forest. They turned back quickly. To avoid being targeted by the beast, they did not even dare to look behind them. They did not stop at all, running as fast as they could towards their destination. Hence, the people who escaped from the cave were split into 4 groups. One group still wanted to leave this place and ran further away. Another group was scattered in the rock forest and lost their way, enduring the pressure of the snow and the lack of oxygen. The third group went back the way they came, back to the cave. The fourth group followed the fox chief, heading towards the Shun cave. There were 5 caves in the salt mine, located in 5 different locations. That was why Xiao Xian and the rest had no way of knowing what was going on over there. However, based on the current situation, staying in the caves was indeed the best choice. At least, that was the case for now. They had not escaped under the snow, but they could imagine how difficult it was. What do we do? Hearing the rumbling sounds from afar, even the arrogant Lan Mu, the mountain wind chief who liked to look down on others, could not help but tremble. He lowered his voice and asked the others. As a chief, he was helpless against such a beast. At the same time, he was relieved that they did not go out. If they did, they might not have been able to escape. The others were silent. The weather change was enough for them. Who knew there was an even bigger problem? This was not something they could deal with easily. If they really fought, they did not know what kind of price they would have to pay. It was possible that they would all be wiped out. They did not know what to do. They had never experienced something like this before. Hence, the 3 chiefs looked at Xiao Xian again. Up until now, Xiao Xian's decision had been correct. Xiao Xian, any ideas? Asked Zheng Luo. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. Send someone down to check. If it's not as cold as before, send a group down. I'll go. Duo Kong volunteered. He just wanted to find something to do. Otherwise, he would feel uncomfortable. This was the first time he felt this way. The beast outside was still clearing the strange rocks. It was probably circling around the salt mine area. Every now and then, it would appear in Xiao Xian's field of vision. Do you guys think it noticed us? Asked the Taihe chief. Zheng Luo and Lan Mu looked at him at the same time but did not say anything. The beast that looked like a giant python did not seem to be in a hurry to come over. Instead, it was slowly clearing the area around it. Xiao Xian, how do you feel? Asked Zheng Luo. Instead of asking the other 2 chiefs, it was better to ask his own tribe's elder. How do I feel? Xiao Xian thought carefully. I feel that it's in a good mood. The 3 chiefs were disappointed. No matter whether the beast was in a good mood or not, it was not good for them. Duo Kong had already returned from the lower level. He arranged for some people to go down. The crowded cave was suddenly much more relaxed. The air was much smoother, but it was still cold. Looks like the frost came from that beast. If it comes this way, we have to avoid it, said Duo Kong. After running for a while, his body was not so stiff, and he could speak more clearly. Now that he thought it through, so what if he died? He was not lonely with so many people. It was just a pity that he could not see Duo Li get married and have children. Just as Duo Kong finished speaking, he heard Xiao Xian say, "It's coming." The beast outside was heading towards the salt mine. It was neither fast nor slow. It even had the mood to clear the uneven ground. When it swept through the strange stone forest, a layer of snow fell on the place it had swept, so it left a long, winding trail behind it. The beast was heading towards Xiao Xian and the others. Seeing the situation outside, they were terrified. They prayed in their hearts, "Don't come here, please don't come here. Go and harm Fox and the others." The beast climbed up the salt mine. As it got closer, Xiao Xian could see it more clearly. The giant beast did indeed look like a snake, but its head was different. It was more angular, and there were also some protruding, icicle-like things distributed around its head. As the beast approached, the temperature in the cave dropped. Xiao Xian gestured for everyone to back off. Luckily, he had arranged for some people to go to the lower levels. Otherwise, they would not be able to retreat quickly. After the beast climbed up the salt mine, it passed by the top of the cave. Even without light, Xiao Xian could hear the sound of frost in the cave. Whoosh! The giant beast's scales scraped against the uneven surface of the salt mine, and the sound was clearly transmitted into the cave. It was like a brush covered in ice, sweeping over everyone's heads. Many people shivered and shrunk their necks. When the sound faded away, Xiao Xian took out a glowing crystal wrapped tightly in animal skin to light up the cave. They had already made way for the area directly below the giant beast. At this moment, a large area, from the top to the bottom of the cave, was covered in a layer of frost. There was a herb that someone had dropped on the ground. It was covered in frost and shattered into pieces when stepped on. That's the king beast. Zheng Luo breathed out slowly. It went to. Xiao Xian listened and recognized it. He pointed in a direction. That way. That's the fox cave, said Zheng Luo. Could the fox have dug it out from the fire crystals? Duo Kong shuddered. He had dug a hole too. Luckily, it was not deep. They did not know if it was the truth. They could only listen carefully to the sounds and guess what happened. In any case, they would definitely not leave the cave now. At that moment, the fox chief led a group of people to hide in the Shen cave. When they entered, they realized that the bird and fox they did not bring were both here. They even found a corner to hide. On the other side, the people hiding in the salt caves of the fox tribe heard the approaching sounds and their teeth chattered. Frost appeared at the entrance of the cave. There was a freezing sound. The people in the cave rushed into the depths of the cave. With a pung sound, the stone that was blocking the entrance of the cave disappeared in the blink of an eye. A beast head covered in white scales that looked like ice crystals appeared at the entrance of the cave. To a human, the cave was already very big, but to this giant beast, it was still one size smaller. The people in the cave heaved a sigh of relief when the beast could not enter. They stood far away, looking nervously at the strange beast head at the entrance. Its eyes were as cold as ice, its pupils as sharp as swords, staring into the cave as if it wanted to freeze the air. It looked into the cave. Then it suddenly opened its mouth and roared. The piercing sound rushed into the cave, bringing with it white frost. It rushed into the depths of the cave. Chapter 469. The inside of the cave was pitch black. In the deepest part of the cave, where the fire crystals were dug out, about 10 people were waving their weapons, trying to pry the fire crystals out of the ground. When the incident happened, the fox and Shin chiefs were in a hurry to escape. They did not have time to take the fire crystals with them. The basket of fire crystals beside them was kicked over. The fire crystals scattered on the ground, frozen by the frost from the pit. There were indeed some who left with the fox tribe's chief, but there were also some who did not manage to escape. They missed the best chance to escape and stayed in the cave. Some of them felt that staying in the cave was the safest, so they did not follow their chief out of the cave. Now, the leader was not here, and the people in the cave were either dead or injured. No one cared about them. According to the people who ran out and came back, there was a huge, ferocious beast outside. They could not fight it, so they could only come back and hide. Some people knew about the fire crystals, so they came here, trying to pry the fire crystals out of the ground. The fire crystals were very attractive to totemic warriors. For people were digging, one person holding a torch. Not far away, there were about 20 people guarding, preventing others from coming over to take the crystals. Fortunately, the people who escaped into the cave did not rush all the way to the innermost part of the cave. They were worried that the innermost part of the cave was not safe because there was a lot of frost and people who had frozen to death. If it was safe, the two chiefs would not have run out. Beside the fire crystal pit, the person holding the torch felt cold, even though he was close to the fire source. The ground around him was covered in white frost. They didn't see what happened here with their own eyes, but they could guess from what they saw. Hurry up! The guard not far away urged them. They felt that the surroundings were too cold. It would be great if they could use the fire crystals. It's just a fire crystal. Why are we taking so long? Someone muttered. Easy for you to say. Do you know how hard the ice is? The swordsmen were panting. They didn't understand why the closer they got to the hole, the harder the ice became. Moreover, the ice here was different from the ice outside. It was too hard. Even though half of the fire crystals were already exposed, it was still difficult to pry them out. The bronze weapons in their hands were not very good. They could only be considered ordinary. They were the kind that the merchants in cities sold in large batches. It was even more difficult to use them. As the swords and sabers slashed down, ice shards splashed onto their faces, necks, and mouths. A warrior shrunk his neck and shook his body. He stuck out his tongue and licked the ice chips that had splashed onto his mouth. "Salty," the man said. "Nonsense. Of course the water in the salt cave is salty. Hiss, so cold." Suddenly hearing the noise, a warrior who was guarding not far away asked in a trembling voice, "What happened outside the cave?" The restlessness of the crowd in the cave made them very uneasy. He could vaguely hear someone shouting, "It's outside, it's outside. That giant beast has come in." The people guarding there panicked. "No, it can't come in. It definitely can't come in." It wasn't clear whether he was comforting himself or convincing others. But the people in front, before he finished speaking, they heard a roar. At this moment, the people in the upper level of the salt cave seemed to have encountered a strong wind with frost. It blew so hard that they stopped breathing and couldn't open their eyes. It was as if they were in a snowstorm outside the cave. In the lower level of the salt cave, a warrior raised his hand to block the wind. The wind here was not as strong as above. After all, there were many people in the upper level of the cave. They blocked most of the strong wind. "Hey, the people in front, what happened?" A warrior shouted against the wind. No one responded. "Ka ka ka." They seemed to have heard such a sound in their ears. Beside the fire crystal pit, the people who were holding weapons to pry out the fire crystals also stopped. The torches beside them had been extinguished by the wind just now. The heat source disappeared, and the cold was bone-chilling. The warrior who held the extinguished torch quickly hid in a sunken place behind the pit based on his memory. He took out the prepared tools to ignite the fire with his back to the wind. He skillfully identified the gelatinous substance smeared on the end of the ignition stick. Then he took out a flint and rubbed it. Whoosh! The flame ignited on the ignition stick. The fire was not hot enough. He wanted to ignite the torch. The wind became weaker. He should be able to ignite the torch. However, before he could ignite the torch, the fire on the ignition stick went out instantly. Damn it! After cursing, the warrior felt the temperature around him getting lower and lower. He breathed in the air that almost froze his lungs. He whispered to the warriors who were digging for the fire crystals a few steps away, "Do any of you have any fire sticks? I've used up the last one." No one responded. There was dead silence around. The warrior wanted to say something, but he found that his consciousness seemed to have begun to leave this body. He could no longer feel the cold around him. He only felt that his body was heavy and stiff. He could not move until he completely lost consciousness. If there was light, one would find that the warrior was covered with a layer of frost from his face to his feet. A few steps away, the people who were digging for the fire crystals were still holding their weapons. They stood there stiffly, without any breath or breath. There were more than 20 guards not far away, but there was no heartbeat. The cracking sounds around continued. The frost covered the entire upper and lower levels of the salt cave. All life stopped. On the other side, in Yanjiao's salt cave, the three chiefs were expressionless. They did not know what expression to show. They had heard the sound just now. They could feel the murderous intent in it. Strangely, the murderous intent was not very strong. It was a gut feeling. Maybe it doesn't care about us at all. It just wants to take revenge on the people who disturbed it? Xiao Xian tried to sound positive. Although he wanted to comfort them, he was not spouting nonsense. Just like when he got lost in the King Stoneworm's cave, the stones around him were changing. He was not too far away from the King Stoneworm. He did not believe that the King Stoneworm did not sense his presence. It was just ignoring it. It was like how people would ignore an ant when walking on the road. Or maybe it's in a good mood today. That's why the murderous intent is not strong? Zheng Luo probed. Xiao Xian had said that the king beast was in a good mood. No matter what, just don't provoke it. Although the king beast's temper was worse than the king stoneworm's, it was still better than the fearsome beasts in the forest. Ignoring it was fine. It was a good thing for them. Suddenly there was a tremor. Then another and another. But each time it was getting further and further away. Xiao Xian hurried to the entrance of the cave. He did not stay for long. The gap in the cave was once again covered by snow. Pushing the snow aside, Xiao Xian looked outside. He saw a snake-like figure in the snow. It moved and crawled on the ground, then jumped up again. It was really lively. When the sound was far away and could no longer be heard, everyone in the cave let out a long sigh of relief. Did it leave? Zheng Luo asked. It should have left for now. I don't know when it will come back. After all, this is its nest, Xiao Xian said. I'll go take a look. I'll go too. Zheng Luo turned to Duo Kong. Keep an eye on the people in the cave. Don't let them run out. Seeing Zheng Luo and Xiao Xian leave, the other two chiefs decided to go take a look too. They wanted to know what was going on outside. Now that the king beast was gone, they had to take this chance. This was a rare opportunity. If they could make it back alive, they might be able to record this experience on a scroll so that the future generations of the tribe would know that there was such a magical place where a king beast lived. They had been mining salt in this magical place for hundreds of years. At the same time, they could confirm if they could leave this place. Listening carefully, Xiao Xian pushed the boulder aside and hurried out. When the other three chiefs came out, he pushed the boulder back into the cave. It was still windy outside. Snow filled the air. It was much colder than inside the cave. The strange rock field had been flattened and covered in a thick layer of snow. Let's go check out the fox cave, Zheng Luo suggested. The four of them carefully walked in that direction, following the tracks left behind by the giant beast until they reached the fox tribe's salt cave. Wherever the beast had crawled, there was a layer of hard frost. They felt a chill from the soles of their feet. When they saw the state of the fox cave, they felt a little cold was nothing. At least it was better than these unlucky bastards. The entrance to the fox cave was covered in a thick layer of ice. The frost had shrunk the entrance to the cave. There was now a layer of ice almost a meter high at the entrance. They jumped on it and walked into the cave. Zheng Luo held the glowing crystal and had a clear view of the cave. Near the entrance of the cave, there were people frozen under the layer of ice. They should have been trampled here when they were escaping. As they walked further in, they saw some broken pieces. Yes, broken pieces. The frozen people cracked one by one. A chill ran up their spines. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Even the hearts of the three leaders trembled violently. Xiao Xian lifted his foot and continued walking. There were a few people blocking the path, all of them standing. Their bodies were intact, but they were all frozen and covered in a layer of white. Passing through the gaps, the four of them arrived at the lower level of the cave. They thought the lower level would be better, but it was not. Although there were no other signs of life here, they could not help but feel fear when they saw it for themselves. They were covered in a layer of white frost. They could vaguely make out their expressions and guess what they wanted to do before they were frozen. Fire crystals? As they got closer, Zheng Luo sensed the presence of fire crystals. As soon as they heard the words fire crystals, the other two leaders immediately cast aside the fear they felt just now. Seeing the frozen fire crystals on the ground, the three chiefs became enthusiastic. The king beast was not here. There were no other living people in the cave, and there were fire crystals on the ground. What should they do? Dig. Chapter 470. There were fire crystals on the ground. Half of them had been dug out by the fox people, but now they were all frozen. They had to dig again. However, the three chiefs had better tools and were stronger too. With the illumination of the glowing crystals, they dug faster. But they were alert as they dug, in case other people came, like the fox and Shin tribesmen. Xiao Xian planned to jump into the pit they dug for the fire crystals. There was a layer of white ice on the walls of the pit. He tied a rope to the bottom and slid down along the straw rope. The hole was deep and slippery. It was easier to use a rope. After Xiao Xian entered the hole, he landed where the beast used to be. After the beast left, this was a long tunnel. The walls were covered in a layer of white ice. Although it was thin, it was frozen together with the rock. It was very hard. The temperature was so low that Xiao Xian could not even feel the warmth of his breath. He could feel that there were fire crystals all around this tunnel. Perhaps this giant beast stayed in this place because of the fire crystals, just like the Bat King of the past. However, even after so many years, this snake still hadn't come out. Hibernating for a few hundred years? That was really long. He wondered how big it was. Waving his sword, he cut through the ice and dug out a fire crystal embedded in the wall. Sensing it, Xiao Xian realized that this fire crystal had been absorbed before. It was just not completely absorbed. That snake? Regardless, Xiao Xian sped up and waved the sword in his hand. He didn't need the glowing crystal. With his special vision, he could see the fire crystals on the wall clearly. His attacks were accurate. Zing! Zing! In an instant, the entire tunnel was filled with the sounds of digging, as well as Zheng Luo and the rest digging. After Zheng Luo and the rest had collected all the fire crystals, they even dug out the crystals from the frozen bodies of the fox people and put them all into their own pouches. Only then did the three of them jump into the long tunnel below. I was planning to snatch the salt mine from Fox. I didn't expect to snatch their fire crystals instead. The Taihe leader laughed. No matter what, he was able to get the fire crystals. His heavy heart was finally comforted. The Fox team had already reached the fire crystal layer. Each crystal was bigger than the ones in Yanjiao's salt cave. The three leaders rested for a moment before continuing their operation. No one knew how long the Beast King would be gone. They had to take advantage of the opportunity to dig as much as they could. They would leave when the Beast King returned. I've lived for so long, but I've never seen so many fire crystals. The Taihe tribe's leader's breathing quickened. No one knew if he was tired or happy. I've lived for almost 80 years, but I've never seen so many fire crystals. Lanmu of the Mountain Wind tribe sighed. Xiao Xian paused in his digging. Zheng Luo was silent too. The Taihe leader glanced at Zheng Luo, but didn't say anything. The three leaders looked about the same age, around 40 years old. But in reality, they were much older than Zheng Luo. Perhaps others who didn't know the Yanjiao tribes didn't know this, but the Taihe tribe, who had lived with the Yanjiao for a long time, knew that among all the tribes, the Yanjiao had the shortest average lifespan. Xiao Xian only found out later. He had sensed it on the other side of the sea, but wasn't sure. He only found out after coming here. The Yanjiao people were different in many ways, but there was one thing that made them different from other tribes. They were like the most ordinary people without any power. That was their lifespan. Among the people from the Taihe tribe who came this time, there were many who were over 100 years old, but they looked like they were still in their prime. However, in the Flaming Horn tribe, those over 100 years old, even if they were still alive, would definitely not be able to hunt. They could only help with farming and couldn't do anything too tiring. At the end of their lives, they would age very quickly, because their lives were incomplete. This was something they didn't expect when the fire seed split. The reason why the ancestors felt so guilty in the notes they left behind was not only because they could not return to their homeland, but more importantly, they felt the punishment brought to them by the splitting of the fire seed. They did not have a complete lifespan. The Flaming Horns were stronger than other tribes in many aspects, but in terms of lifespan, there was a knife hanging over their heads. Before they could finish their journey, their lifespan would be cut off mercilessly. Perhaps the shaman on the other side of the sea knew about this too, but didn't tell anyone. Plus, the Yanjiao tribe had always been isolated from the rest of the world, so no one noticed this problem. They didn't feel any negative emotions or pressure. The people here didn't interact much with the outside world, either, so most people didn't know. Perhaps some of the warriors knew, but kept it to themselves. Back then, the ancestors of the tribe allowed intermarriage with other tribes. Perhaps they wanted to use this opportunity to solve this problem. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The blood of the Flaming Horns was too strong, and the blood of other tribes couldn't suppress it. When Xiao Xian first came here, most of the ancestral notes he read were filled with guilt, but they didn't mention the reason. It was only when Xiao Xian returned to the tribe from Gongjia Mountain and practiced controlling the ancestral bone ornaments that the shaman told him. Many people in the tribe knew their lifespan wasn't as long as other tribes, but they didn't know the reason. Some people thought it was because the Yanjiao people's lifespan was used to increase their strength. They were given divine strength, so they were stripped of other things. Many people felt better when they thought about it this way. The shaman didn't tell them because she didn't want them to have such a slim hope. Generations passed. It had been almost 1,000 years, but they still couldn't go back. They didn't know when it started, but this was selectively forgotten. Only the higher-ups of the tribe knew. Zheng Luo knew, the shaman knew. Others didn't know the real reason. Xiao Xian's arrival was a ray of light, a ray of hope. In the past year, the shaman had sent a few batches of people to the seaside. Xiao Xian had been waiting for an opportunity to move the entire tribe. Unfortunately, they never found the opportunity. No one knew how long it would take for the opportunity to come again. Go back. How? As Xiao Xian pondered, he became absent-minded while digging for the fire crystals. The mountain wind chief was puzzled. What was with the atmosphere? He suddenly felt stifled. I'll take a look around first. Xiao Xian passed the fire crystals to Zheng Luo and ran along the tunnel. As he ran, Xiao Xian identified his bearings and calculated the distance. He stopped at a spot and looked at the top of the tunnel. This should be close to Yanjiao's salt cave. It wasn't directly above, but diagonally above. He didn't start digging immediately. Xiao Xian walked along the tunnel until he reached the end. This was where the king beast had emerged from the ground. But the entrance was already frozen. A very thick layer of ice blocked the entire entrance. The closer he got to the entrance, the colder it got. Xiao Xian didn't walk over. He listened carefully. When he didn't hear the sound of the king beast outside, he turned back. The king beast had frozen the entrance. It probably wasn't going to come back anytime soon. He called Zheng Luo and the others over and told them his plan. He planned to start digging below Yanjiao's salt cave. If they were going to be trapped here for a few more days, would they have to come down from Fox's place every time? The Fox tribe was clearly being targeted by the Beast King. If they went there, they might provoke the Beast King. Besides, most of the Fox and Shin tribe members weren't here. If they came back, a fight would be inevitable. There was no need to waste time with the Fox and Shin tribes. The four of them discussed and decided to do it. It didn't matter where they dug. Xiao Xian quickly waved his sword, using it as a shield to block the shovel. He broke through the ice layer of the tunnel and dug out the rocks on the wall one by one. Zheng Luo and the other two worked harder too. They weren't sure what was going on outside, so they couldn't leave immediately. They might as well get more fire crystals. Even if they had to fight the king beast later, they would protect a portion of the tribesmen back. If they could bring the crystals back, they wouldn't have wasted their time in this weather. The fire crystals they dug out could last the tribe for a long time. They didn't dig a large area, not even a tenth of the size of Fox's, but with the four of them working together, they progressed quickly. In the beginning, the rocks were hard, but the higher they went, the easier it became. In Yanjiao's cave, the warriors guarding the fire crystal pit panicked when they heard the commotion. They hurried to look for Duo Kong. Duo Kong sent a portion of the people in the cave up first to prevent the ice from spreading. After that, he brought a few people carefully to the fire crystal pit. They planned to run as soon as they saw the ice. What else was underground other than the king beast? Screech. The sounds from below grew clearer. It didn't sound like the king beast. There was no intimidating aura and no ice. Was it an enemy? Fox tribe or Shin tribe? Duo Kong grew cautious and inched closer, craning his neck to look into the pit. He signaled for the others to be ready. The other soldiers around him were also gripping their weapons, their facial muscles twitching nervously. They were frightened by the king beast. They didn't want to see anything strange jump out from below. They hoped it was a human, no matter if it was Fox, Shun, or any other tribe. The sounds came closer. The people around the pit were tense. It really didn't sound like a giant beast. There was movement below. Duo Kong raised his hand. Poof! Rumble! The soil and rocks were pushed aside. Duo Kong was about to wave his arm and shout, "Attack!" when four heads popped out from below, their faces covered in dirt. He focused his gaze. Yo! 3 chiefs and an elder jumped out of the cave. The 4 of them had worked so hard to dig their way up. When they popped their heads out, they saw a group of people surrounding the pit, all pointing their weapons at them. Chapter 471. Seeing that it was these 4 people who had appeared, Duo Kong was stunned. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief and looked again. "Chief, why did you come out from below?" Duo Kong laughed dryly and put away his axe. The others did not dare to fight the 3 chiefs and 1 elder, so they put away their axes just as quickly as Duo Kong. But they were still confused. Didn't the chief go outside? Why did he come out from below? Duo Kong found someone to throw a rope, and Xiao Xian and the others climbed out of the hole one by one. Zheng Luo explained the reason briefly, and then sat down on a rock not far away, panting. Although they were relatively strong, they had never stopped digging from the tunnel down here. They were also afraid that the king beast would come back if they were too slow. They were so tense that they finally relaxed. Duo Kang's eyes lit up. That means if we can't leave, we can jump down here every day to dig for fire crystals? That's right. Chief, you rest first. I'll continue digging. Duo Kong rubbed his hands. The king beast was less afraid now. The fire crystals were more attractive. Don't bring too many people. Be alert. Come back if you notice anything wrong. Don't be greedy. Zheng Luo reminded. Also, clean up the dirt in the tunnel. There was a lot of dirt in the tunnel because of their digging. If the king beast entered the tunnel again, they wondered if it would be angry at the dirt. They shuddered at the thought of the fox's salt cave. It was too tragic. Not a single person on the upper and lower floors could avoid it. Got it. Duo Kong called a few people over. They put on their equipment and slid down the rope. The other two tribes had the same idea. They would not miss this opportunity. They grabbed the rope and slid down too. Xiao Xian, when can we leave? Zheng Luo asked. I don't know. Wait. Xiao Xian took out a rope, planning to do another divination. He wanted to know about the king beast, but the divination failed. After so many times of divination, Xiao Xian had already gained experience. Generally speaking, it was very difficult for him to divine people or beasts that were far more powerful than him. Therefore, after failing once, Xiao Xian tried to divine the weather again. Although there was still no clear conclusion, the results of the divination told Xiao Xian that the weather here would get worse. We'll leave in 2 days, Xiao Xian said. 2 days later? Zheng Luo frowned. Why? It wasn't that he didn't trust Xiao Xian, he just wanted to know the reason. In 2 days, the snow should stop temporarily. When it starts again, it won't be like this. Xiao Xian told him the results of the divination. The knot did not tell him what would happen in the future, but it did hint that the best time to leave was in 2 days, when the snow would stop. The Taiha and Mountain Wind chiefs took note of Xiao Xian's words. They thought about it and made plans. In the past, the Mountain Wind people did not have a good impression of the Yanjiao tribe. They only thought that they were strong and rude. But now it seemed that the Yanjiao people were not bad, especially that Xiao Xian. Then let's prepare in advance. Tell the people in the cave that we'll leave in 2 days, the Taiha chief said. Since they had decided to leave in 2 days, the matter of digging for fire crystals was even more urgent. After a good rest, the 3 leaders continued to dig in the pit. The people in the salt cave also urged them to hurry up and dig out the salt mine. They only had 2 days, so they had to dig as much as they could. In the past, they had only dug out as much as was needed in the salt cave. They wouldn't dig out too much as it would be useless if there was too much. They wouldn't sell all of it either. What they sold was only a small part of it. That was why they had only dug out 2 levels of the salt cave in the past few hundred years. Fortunately, they had only dug out 2 levels. If they had continued digging, there would be no more salt. If they had dug out fire crystals in advance and provoked the king beast in advance, the people guarding here would have been wiped out long ago. After a few days of idling, the warriors of the 3 tribes felt much better now that they had work to do. They did not have to think too much about it every day. Whether it was the salt from the top of the cave or the bottom of the cave, they brought all the salt with them. This might be their last time here. No one wanted to be arrogant in the territory of a king beast. If they had known, they would have left long ago. Logically speaking, this was Yanjiao's salt cave. The Taiha and Mountain Wind people should not be digging here. But their cave had not been cleared out yet and time was tight. Plus, Zheng Luo felt that this would be their last time digging here. Since they were partners, they might as well dig in the same cave. There was a lot of salt left anyway. If they finished in 2 days, it would be just right. If they came back later, the Taiha and Mountain Wind people would help Yanjiao get another cave. Just like that, some people dug for salt while others dug for fire crystals. The division of labor was divided into different areas. There were people outside the cave observing and guarding. Once they noticed the king beast's movements, they would quickly retreat. The king beast appeared around noon on the 2nd day. It only wandered around for a while before leaving. It did not come to the salt cave. The people who went into the tunnel to dig for fire crystals met Fox's people as they dug. Both sides met in the tunnel and almost clashed swords. Especially Mountain Wind's people. They looked at each other with fire in their eyes. When enemies meet, their eyes were especially red. Just as they were about to fight, someone above warned, "The king beast has appeared." With a whoosh, both sides ran back to their respective caves. The fox people ran towards the fox cave, while the other side ran towards the flaming horn cave. After running back for a while, they realized that the king beast was only wandering around. They relaxed and continued digging. But this time, they did not meet the fox people again. The Mountain Wind chief, Lan Mu, told them to ignore the fox people for now. Revenge must be taken, but the tribe's matters were more important. They did not have much time. "Chief, what do we do?" In the fox cave, a fox warrior asked the silent fox chief with a dark expression. They were hiding in the Shun tribe's salt cave. When they heard the king beast's roar, they knew that things were not going well in their cave. While they were glad, they were also sad. They knew that the situation here was terrible. After the king beast left, they hid for a while before coming back. To their surprise, all they saw was a cave full of ice men. There was no sign of life at all. When they came to the fire crystal pit, they saw traces of people digging. There were also traces in the tunnel below the pit. They walked along the tunnel and heard the sound of digging. When they looked over, they saw people from the 3 tribes. Clearly, the fire crystals that they worked so hard to dig out were all stolen by the 3 tribes in Yanjiao. Why didn't the king beast roar at Yanjiao's cave? A fox warrior complained. But they knew that the fox and Shin tribesmen were the first to provoke the king beast. Especially the miners. Not only did they touch the king beast, they even pried off its scales. Even though it was only a small piece, it was still an affront. Perhaps that was why the king beast went to the cave and roared, killing everyone in the cave. In terms of regret, the one who regretted it the most was the fox chief. They had quarreled with the Shun tribe at the Shun tribe's cave and almost broke off relations with them. The only reason the Shun chief held himself back was because they were not as smart as the fox people. If they wanted to leave this place safely, they had to rely on the fox people. What should they do? No one knew. Since we can't think of anything, why don't we pay attention to the mountain wind? The woman standing next to the fox leader thought for a moment and said, if we fight the king beast head-on, we won't be able to win. Look at the people frozen to death in the cave. But what if we have bait? The fox chief's eyes flashed. You mean we should let them attract the king beast's attention while we escape? That's right. That's a good idea. But I'm not satisfied with those fire crystals. No one was willing to give up those crystals. They were so close. Wouldn't it be a waste if they didn't dig? Hence, the fox and Shin tribesmen discussed again. They decided to dig for the crystals first, then find a chance to trick the Yanjiao people. Then they could escape. It was a good plan, but just as they were digging for fire crystals, the people who were watching the Flaming Horn cave came to report that the people there had left the cave. Left? There were so many crystals down there. The king beast never left. Why did they leave? The snow has stopped, the wind has stopped too. Maybe they decided to use this chance to leave. The Shin chief hesitated. Should they leave too? But there were so many crystals down there, and they hadn't dug out much yet. What they dug out in one day was more than what they had dug for so long. They couldn't bear to leave. Then let's dig for a few more days? The fox chief suggested, but his mind was racing. Even without the flaming horns as bait, there were still others. Once they dug up the fire crystals, all they had to do was push the others out. Hence, when the 3 Yanjiao tribes left, the fox and Shin tribesmen did not follow. Instead, they continued to dig. The people the fox invited over with salt knew about the existence of the crystals. Even if they were asked to leave now, they wouldn't be willing. Their minds were filled with the crystals. Looking at the people whose minds were filled with the crystals, the fox chief exchanged a look with the woman beside him. The corners of his mouth curled up. People who had lost their minds were the easiest to manipulate. They were the best bait. At this moment, the Yanjiao tribesmen, Taiha and Mountain Wind walked out of the cave, heading towards the white ground. The snow on the ground leveled by the king beast was 6 to 7 meters thick. It was taller than the houses they lived in. And now they were struggling to move forward in this snowy land. Will we meet a king beast? Asked Duokong. I don't think so, right? Xiao Xian wasn't sure either. Hopefully, they weren't that unlucky. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.